Corvus stared at me for a moment as the cat jumped onto a nearby shelf and promptly knocked off one of the jars. The glass shattered on the sandstone floor, the sound echoing in the chamber as his head half-turned to track it. "Your cat?" he asked with an amused smile, sounding annoyed but curious. "The first time I saw it was when I entered the archives," I replied as the cat knocked another jar to the floor and looked down at its own mess in confusion. If it kept this up, I wouldn't have to do anything. Corvus made to grab the cat, rushing around a shelf. It sensed his intentions, leaped down and raced away among the shelves. Corvus realized he wasn't going to catch it and focused back on me. He studied me intently, hesitation in his eyes. As hounds, we were trained to recognize the dozen creatures that could mimic humans. I expected him to try and stab me with silver before long a tried and true method for uncovering shape-changers. He spoke in a casual tone when you didn't arrive in Varvo, and the Caliphate fleet didn't either. We assumed you died slowing them down. Centurion Sergius was praised for your efforts by the Emperor. He paused and asked curiously, "How did you manage it?" He had given me the answers I sought without me even asking. They thought I was dead. I slowly walked toward Corvus, preparing to bullshit him as I closed the distance. I also needed to be careful about the range of his ability to influence me. From reviewing the charm affinity spell forms, I knew the closer you were to a target, the more potent the spell. I snuck aboard the lead warship and killed the orc priestess. She was quite comely for an orc. I smiled lasciviously. When she used her magic, she was unencumbered by clothes, making her a temptingly easy target. It was a lie, but a plausible one since we had been trained in assassination. I sighed heavily, as if recalling a bad memory. Unfortunately, the Pathfinders took offense to me spearing their priestess and chased me for days seeking revenge. I lost my goggles and message book during my flight east. They blocked me from heading south to Varvo, but I eventually reached Vartaholm. I stopped 20 feet from him to appear unthreatening. He seemed to be processing my words and considered my story believable, even smirking when I called the orc priestess comely. He nodded slowly. "How are you here then? In the archives?" Corvus asked skeptically. "Centurion Sergius sent me here after I reached Ogala. I thought it would be fun to surprise you," I answered in a friendly tone. He immediately frowned. "My father would have never directed you to the archives." Well, Shitty miscalculated, but I maintained my smile. Corvus had even warned me that his father didn't trust me. I thought that after saving the Centurion's ass and delaying the fleet, I would at least be trusted. Corvus tensed, and I stepped forward to within 15 feet and attempted to remove his head. An ether shield flashed around him, and I realized that bastard was wearing the amulet I had given him under his persuasive magic. It somehow defended against my spell form as my ether bottomed out, causing a severe backlash that made me stumble. I focused through the pounding headache, pushing the migraine away, drew Magebane, and rushed at him. Corvus dodged right, using the heavy shelves for leverage to gain distance while drawing his only weapon, a dagger. He wasn't wearing his hound armor or gear, which explained why he avoided direct confrontation. I knew I couldn't let him escape the room, but I also didn't want to chase him all night. "Why don't we talk about this?" he asked, putting a shelf between us. He probably thought I was a spy, imposter, or some mimic-like creature. I felt his spell form trying to gain a foothold within my subconsciousness, but my surging adrenaline and the necessity to leave no witnesses made it ineffectual. I moved to give him a path to the chamber entrance, and he took it, rushing for the exit. I raced after him, leading with Magebane and my dagger in the other hand. From our time together, I already knew I was much faster than him and overtook him in half a dozen strides. Corvus reached for something on his belt and cursed loudly. "Pluto's cock!" He wasn't wearing his hound belt, so whatever he had hoped to grab wasn't there. He stopped running and turned to fight. We clashed with our blades. Corvus was on the defensive, backpedaling, trying to avoid the Magebane's superior reach. When we separated, he had a long slash down his forearm from my dagger, blood dripping steadily to the floor. The muscle was cut if he wanted to continue. He'd have to switch the dagger to his other hand. Seeing he was outmatched, I assumed he would beg for his life. Instead, he tried his influence spell form again. In a pleading tone, he said, "I will surrender, and you can present me to the man who holds your leash." My father would offer an emperor's ransom for me, I considered telling him about the conspiracy and introducing him to Antonia, but I recognized his attempt and resisted the influence that tried to worm its way into my thoughts. "I serve only myself," I told him, a hint of anger in my voice. He winced and gave up trying to influence me. Then he started grabbing jars of blood samples and throwing them at me. Even wounded, Corvus had good aim not at me, but at the shelves smashing jars so I'd be showered in glass. Frustrated with his stalling, I tossed a pair of pellets to the floor blindness and smoke. I sprinted to block the door. Corvus tried to escape the cloud, but I had already tossed more pellets along his likely path as I moved. Corvus began coughing and stumbling among the shelves, knocking dozens of glass containers to the floor. I planned to let him wear himself out, but then he reached into his satchel and pulled out his message book, fumbling for something to write with. I couldn't let him message his father. I threw my dagger with my free hand, and it made a satisfying thud as it sank into his chest. I closed the distance and followed up with a slash from Magebane. The blade tried to draw on my ether, pulling the minuscule amount I had recovered over the last minute. I didn't need its ability as I pivoted rapidly on my heel and cut into Corvus' neck. He reached for the wound as blood gushed out, dropping the book. I finished Corvus by removing his hand and piercing his heart, not wanting him to suffer. I stood over him, breathing steadily and shaking my head. His shocked, wide-eyed expression was a reminder that I was a killer. Another jar shattered, drawing my attention. The poor cat had knocked over another glass jar as it stumbled along a shelf. The foolish feline had blinded itself by entering the wafts from the pellets. I confirmed Corvus was dead and retrieved the amulet along with his message book. I was curious about what he had discussed with his father. I leaned over and took his hound token from around his neck as well, sending it to my dimensional space. If I needed to show a hound token in the future when departing the Empire, I would prefer it was not mine. I picked up the frightened cat while soothing it. Its claws dug into me for grip, and as a release for its fear. It had been trying to clear its eyes but wasn't having much success. After barring the entrance to the room so I wouldn't be surprised, I walked to the desk, set the cat down, and cleaned its eyes with a water skin I found there. The cat quickly calmed as my voice soothed it, and washing its eyes allowed its vision to clear. Soon, it was rubbing against my leg, treating me as its savior. With the cat taken care of, I checked the large tome and found Castile's, Renus, and Zina's reference numbers. I walked to the shelves, figured out the organizing system, and pulled those 3 samples in glass jars. Each jar contained small cut squares of cloth soaked in their dried blood. The samples were ready to use in a blood compass. My aether had recovered enough to move all the jars into my dimensional space. I was taking these as insurance in case I needed to find one of the mages in the future. I moved to Corvus and placed the collector on him. The collector easily pulled the blue wisps from his still leaking corpse. It felt cold-hearted to harvest someone I knew even, if he was an adversary. I was surprised when a major intellect essence formed. I slipped the essence into one of my pouches and searched his body. He had a silver ring with a faceted ruby and runic script. It was an artifact, though not a dungeon artifact. The dagger he had used was a dungeon runic weapon, but not the one I had given him that had belonged to Celine Greco. I returned to the desk to read his correspondence with his father. The exhausted cat was splayed across the book, sleeping after an eventful night. These message books only held the script for 2 days before it vanished, so I wasn't sure how much I would glean from the correspondence. As I paged through it, I frowned. Centurion Sergius was clearly grooming his son, judging by the volume of entries. Corvus had advocated for me with his father and was upset when I was believed to be dead. From the entries, it was clear Centurion Sergius didn't trust me, but I only had access to the last 2 days of communication. Centurion Sergius was apparently taking 15 of his hounds to support the Emperor's attack on the Esenhem elves, which explained why I had been left alone in the Western Empire, and why the Southern Wilds were undermanned to monitor the growing goblin horde. It also explained why there were only 8 hounds in the city protecting the archives. I had killed 2 and trapped 2 others, so I guessed the remaining 4 were in the city above, guarding the entrances. The goblin problem was more severe than I had thought. Sergius told his son that a hobgoblin general was organizing the goblin hordes. The few hounds near the mountains were issuing dire warnings about the coming surge. I closed the book, frustrated that the communication didn't go back further than 2 days. I pulled the registry book toward me and gently pushed the sleeping cat aside. It was perturbed, but rolled over to continue its nap. Unsurprisingly, samples of neither Centurion Sergius nor Corvus were stored here. I found the entries for First Citizen Boris Angela and First Citizen Justin Cicero. I retrieved and stored those 2 samples, because it never hurt to know where your enemies were. I looked for Duke Octavian's sample as well to gift to Castile. But there was only a dust imprint where it should have been. I still had a few hours until dawn and needed to finish up. The aisles between the shelves were only 4 feet wide, and the shelves were over 10 feet tall, made from thick timbers. There were 20 rows of parallel shelves, each 150 feet in length. I walked along the outer row and began removing the interior supports. The first shelf tilted, sending dozens of glass containers crashing down in a cacophony of shattering glass. It didn't cause a strong enough push to start a domino effect, but the cat was wisely absent as I methodically destroyed the archives. It took much longer than I'd anticipated. The final touch was breaking the casks of lamp oil among the wreckage. I doubted more than 1/10 of the samples had survived. Burning it all was probably more symbolic at this point. I uncorked the oil casks and tossed them around the perimeter of the wreckage. I tossed the index tome into the pile, and Corvus's body followed. As I soaked the book and his corpse with the last cask of oil, I knew it was a risk burning him would alert Sergius that his son was dead, but from what I understood, it would prevent necromancers from speaking with him. I lit the book and stepped back, watching the flames rise. Soon the fire found the puddles of oil, racing along the floor where it had seeped into cracks. The wave of heat forced me to step back as colored smoke rose from the burning pile. The wood was dry, and the oil potent. The fire grew quickly, and I saw the smoke being drawn up into vents high in the ceiling. One of the undamaged jars exploded with a pop. It was time to go before the air fouled too much. Although the underground complex was vast, there was a lot in this room that could burn. As I started climbing the stairs, I found the cat confidently plodding at my side. I turned toward the bunk room where I had trapped the 2 hounds. I heard the pair pounding on the stone-soft thuds and screams. I realized the room was above the archives, and the smoke must be filling it. I had planned not to leave witnesses, but suffocating seemed too cruel a death. The cat hissed, and I turned around to run down the corridor. The smoke must have been reaching the surface and alerting people. I hoped those 2 men deserved their fate and fled into the tunnels. Pulsing earth speak, I made my way back to the old woman's shop. The cat took the lead and guided us straight back to its home. I rewarded him with another plate of eggs and bacon. I then returned the blocks to seal the access I had made. I was starting to feel the warning signs of aether burn and was glad my work was done. I crept up the steps and cracked the cellar door, surprised to see the morning sun filtering through the windows. The cat dashed past me and up the stairs. I didn't see the old woman and moved to the back door. Just as I was about to slip out, a dry voice cut through the air from another room. "How did you get in here?" I paused, worried I'd have to deal with her. I pulled the hood of my manticore cloak tight over my head to hide my features. The cat meowed loudly, seeking attention. "I'll feed you in a bit, Apollo," she said, addressing my feline accomplice. Judging by his whining tone, I was sure he was telling his mistress there was an intruder, but I didn't wait to be discovered. I slipped into the alley. As I walked toward the eastern gate to leave the city, a few strangled puffs of dark smoke began to rise from some of the sewer grates I passed. I didn't wait for the city's alarms to sound, and was soon on the road to Sobralto, join Mavatheth. As soon as I was out of sight of the city of Sagrin and the surrounding farms, I moved off the road. It was a long way to Sobral, and I suspected anyone walking alone would be swept up by passing blocks of soldiers. Army camps required a lot of bodies to operate. If they didn't shove a sword in my hand because of my limp, I could find myself doing other duties to support the army. I had mine and Corvus's hound token, but I didn't want to announce my affiliation to anyone or risk being tracked. I made good miles the first day, and as I made camp in a small barn that night, I cleaned my blood compass and used one of Castile's samples. The pull was very faint, which meant she was still alive and very far from me. She was east of me, which confirmed what Zaina had told me about the company joining the Emperor's army. The question was whether there would be an attempt on the Emperor. It seemed almost suicidal from my point of view. They could not have suborned all the mages and legionnaires at the Emperor's side. I didn't use the Dreamscape amulet for long, but I did get a bit of practice and reviewed the regional maps in detail. Once I collected Mavaith, we would need to find a way to enter the Bhutan Caliphate to look for his sister. The only way I could see this happening was as members of the Adventurers Guild. There were dungeons in the Bhutan Caliphate that outsiders were allowed to delve. Over the next week, I stayed out of towns and cities as I navigated the wilds towards Sobral. I successfully avoided any encounters with wildlife, and Monstersi didn't want to get delayed. I did find one of the hound caches on the way. As Corvus had said, there was a stone at the base of a forked tree. A layer of composting leaves covered a sealed cask that I found buried a few inches deep with earthspeak. I was disappointed by what it contained. It looked like someone had gotten there before me, and it had not been restocked. There were no artifacts, and the only useful bits of gear were 4 empty quivers, a few dozen meal bars, and a wrapped stack of silver coins. I took the silver as back payoed. I covered the cache again and continued toward Sobral. When I reached the city of Telas, I took to the road to hasten my journey. I found myself in Lul, just southwest of Sobral, 2 days later. Outside Lul, the army was marshalling freshly trained soldiers, and I was forced to show a hound token to avoid conscription. Fortunately, the captain who checked the token did not record its number. This might have raised some interesting questions, as Corvus had been dead for a few days. From there, I made the 24 miles to Sobral in half a day. Getting inside Sobral's walls was a lot easier than I thought it would be. The flood of refugees had built a shanty town outside the city walls, and the flow of people in and out was steady all day. I was not even questioned when I entered the city. The Duchess had easily tripled her city's population since I was last here. In my disguise, I went to a familiar tavern to listen for rumors and gossip. I wanted to find out if the Goliaths had reached Sobral, and I planned to sneak into the Citadel's stables tonight and abscond with Ginger. The ale was expensive and terrible, but the tables were packed and the conversations lively. Soon after, I sat at a small table along the wall. A young woman sat across from me uninvited. If you get the room, 3 large coppers. It was clear she wasn't taking my order, and I flinched at her thin appearance and young age. The desperation in her voice tugged at me. I passed her a large copper. Get us both some ale and food. I handed her my half-empty cup to fill. When she returned with 2 plates and mugs, I watched her devour the food and slid her my plate, which she quickly finished as well. Have there been any Goliaths in Sobral? I asked after she finished the 2 meals. She drank her entire mug of ale before answering. Just 2 large coppers if you get the room. Have there been any Goliaths in Sobral? I asked again, ignoring her offer. Just the woodsman. He lives north. I think an all right fellow. Maven, I think, is his name. Doesn't cause a commotion and sells his game to the local inns. A large copper, but only because you're nice, she added a little pleadingly. How has the Duchess been treating the refugees? I asked, returning a weak smile. Well enough. Work is getting harder to come by, and my father broke his hand while cutting down trees for the new mill, but my brothers are out planting at the Duchess's new farms. I need to help out how I can, she stated distressingly. I couldn't tell if her story was true, but she seemed naive enough that I doubted she knew how to lie for sympathy. Thank you for your time. I placed a large handful of coppers and large coppers on the table as I stood. She swept them up, wide-eyed, but they were barely 2 silver in total. If I had given her silver, I feared she might get assaulted. She stood to go with me, thinking I had paid for her time, but I pressed a hand to her shoulder and didn't let her rise. Go be with your family. I paid you for your time for a few days. I walked away, never getting her name. I left the tavern and stopped by the apothecary. I didn't enter, just confirmed the 3 young women were still working there. I saw Karina behind the counter, smiling brightly at a customer, and Lila teaching another young woman at a workbench in the back. I nodded to myself, pleased I had helped, and moved to an inn near the citadel to wait for nightfall. The inn smelled a little musty, but the room was clean. When the sun set, I snuck easily over the wall into the citadel. The Duchess had hired a lot more guards, and I was nearly spotted dropping into the courtyard. One thing about sneaking into a placif, you looked like you belonged. People tended to leave you alone. As numerous servants dashed about their business, I walked past the open courtyard toward the stables. I could imagine Adrian and Delmar being upset at how lax the guards' discipline had become in less than a year. I slipped into the stables and walked past a stall where a stable boy was rubbing down a horse. He didn't give me a second look as I made my way down the walkway. My heart raced as none of the stalls held my reddish-brown mare. I walked out the back to the small corral, but none of the 4 horses there had reddish-brown coats either. Although I knew it was a possibility, I had hoped the Duchess would have kept Ginger, but a trained and healthy warhorse would have been swept up for the war effort. Sorrowfully, I walked out of the citadel gates, and one of the guards briefly questioned me. I told him I had entered through another gate and had just dropped off some herbs for the kitchens, which appeased his curiosity. The city gates were shut at night, and I didn't care to sneak out, so I returned to my room at the inn and waited until morning, feeling a heavy tinge of guilt over losing Ginger. In the morning, I headed north of the city, and was surprised to find that much of the forest had been cut, and dozens of rough cabins had been constructed in the months I'd been gone. They were clearing a large swath of forest, and a lumber mill was beginning operations that very morning. No one me any attention as I continued north into the woodlands. I approached Maveth's cabin with trepidation. I was reassured to see freshly stretched giant weasel hides outside. Maybe the 4 Goliaths had come directly here and were safe. I pulsed Earth's speak, and found that he had moved 2 of his alarm tripwires, so I stepped over them. I could hear Maveth mumbling to himself inside but couldn't make out the words. Taking a breath, I knocked loudly on the wooden door between the 2 massive boulders. Silence fell inside before Maveth boomed. "Who is there?" "Avon calling," I said loudly to the door. I heard Maveth rush to open it. The large gray-skinned man's eyes went wide, and a grin slowly formed on his face. "I thought that was your voice," he yelled excitedly. "Who is Avon?" Before I could answer, an excited horse pushed past Maveth, bowling him out of the way. Ginger head-butted me, pushing me back in her excitement. I wrestled her head, grinning madly. "Ginger, good to see you too. I was worried when you weren't in the stables in Sobril." Maveth was still smiling. I took her before the army collected all the able-bodied horses from the stables. The boys working there helped me sneak her out. I rubbed Ginger's powerful neck, and she nudged me hard, then began exploring my pockets, blowing her nose into them. I laughed aloud. "Well, I still have a few dungeon apples." I produced one, and she inhaled it, chewing happily and creating a foamy mess. Maveth's face slowly turned from happy to discontented. Ginger is most definitely not house-trained." Ginger was already seeking a second apple, and I defended her. "Well, did you praise her every time she did her business outside? Did you take her out every few hours?" Maveth's face turned contemplative. "Well, no." Before he could continue, I said, "So there you have it. She needs positive reinforcement. Just threaten not to give her an apple." Maveth was still processing my words when I asked, "Did the 4 Goliaths I freed reach you?" Maveth cocked his head. "There are other Goliaths in the Telian Empire. Let's go inside and talk, Maveth." I wasn't sure whether I was looking forward to telling him his sister might be alive or not. I walked Ginger first and gave her another apple after she relieved herself, and then she joined us inside. His dwelling did have a musty urine smell to it. Sitting at the table, I took a deep breath and told Maveth, "I am no longer a legionnaire or a hound, Maveth. I won't reveal what I did, since a truth-seeker might uncover the truth from you. But I am leaving the Empire." Maveth looked shocked by my revelation. He finally said, "Where are you going, Eric? Will you come with me to see my father then?" Well, I tried to break the news slowly. You see, I ran into some Goliath slaves unloading a caliphate warship in Kraken Bay. They knew of a Goliath slave woman named Myra. Maveth's tendons bulged in his neck, and his forearms tensed as his fists clenched. His breathing quickened slightly before he calmed. "It's a common name. The orcs have taken many of my people over the years," he said finally, clearly hoping it wasn't his sister's friend. I spoke slowly. "Yeah, that's what the other Goliath said, but she also mentioned that when Myra arrived 9 years ago, She was with another Goliath woman named Zarana. I stopped, watching his reaction. Maveth twitched. He shook his head. Eric, don't play games with me. Zarana is dead. I could see tears welling in his eyes, tears of anger, guilt, and hope. I needed to rein him in a little. I don't know if she's still alive, Maveth, but the Goliath I talked to said they arrived in the Bhutan Caliphate 9 years ago, and knows which orc warlord purchased them, I said to the agitated Maveth. Maveth's head snapped around the cabin, and he stood abruptly, beginning to pack. Where are the Goliaths who told you this? How are we getting into the Bhutan Caliphate? It hadn't taken him long to commit to searching for his sister, no matter how small the hope. It's what I would have done for my sister as well. Calm down, Maveth. I'll go with you to look for your sister. But on the way, we need to go to Gramny, the capital of the Duchy of Manch. I need to drop off some passengers, I informed him. I also hoped Castile and the others might be there as well. It seemed unlikely they would survive confronting the Emperor, but I held out hope. Maveth's face twisted in confusion, and he paused in his packing to study me. Passengers? He slowly pieced it together. Eric, you didn't put more unwilling elves in your dimensional space, did you? He was looking at me disapprovingly. Then some hope flashed in his eyes. Wait, do you have Raelia with you? Of course not, I said, exasperated. I can assure you I don't have a single elf inside my dimensional space. I hesitated and admitted. Just 4 humans the Empire ordered me to kill, but they are very much alive. 4 humans? Maveth said, surprised. We need to get to Gramny as quickly as possible to release your captives. Maveth sighed, a hint of unhappiness in his voice. Captives? That is a bit harsh, I replied. Markert, you can explain your justification on the road. He continued packing. If Zarana is alive, I will find her. We will find her, I said firmly. Maveth nodded appreciatively, and I helped him pack for our journey. Emperor Maximus Augustus Severus sat in his command tent, north of Carenhagen. The recent battle had been won, but not without loss. His thoughts were muddled as he studied the maps on the table. Primus Scorpio stood patiently nearby, waiting for orders. While the Duke Generals had been told to leave the Emperor alone, he focused. How many dead? The Primus came to attention. 206 legionnaires dead, 42 crippled. The soldier count is over 4,000, about half that number crippled, though the healers can get most of them fit to rejoin the ranks in time. Mages? The Emperor asked, reaching into his pocket and removing a faded purple essence. The intellect essence would help him focus for a day or so. His thoughts clarified as the essence dissolved. It tasted salty, and he wondered what creature or person it had come from. Master Mage Gracilis is burnt. Severus frowned, prompting Primus Scorpio to elaborate. First Citizen Aureus retreated on the left flank, and Master Mage Gracilis was forced forward to hold the line. He also lost all his legionnaires and is demanding Aureus be punished, Scorpio reported. 3 freshly raised mages were also burnt, but their loss will not affect our combat strength. Severus tried to remember who First Citizen Aureus was. Once he could recall every first citizen in the Empire instantly. Now their names were foggy memories. He reached for minutes to trace the genealogy, and Primus Scorpio respectfully waded through the Emperor's internal deliberations. Finally, Severus found the thread of memories he had been searching for. First Citizen Aureus was the great-grandson of his 3rd daughter, Persia. Persia had died over 2 centuries ago. He vaguely remembered the funeral services. Execute First Citizen Aureus for retreating in the face of the enemy. Assign Master Mage Gracilis 20 of my Imperial Legionnaires. And give him this. He reached into his belt and searched for the correct essence. Most of the essences he carried were to aid focus. He produced a glossy black spheria major channeling essence. His thoughts drifted unbidden to the time he had burnt his own ether channels. Severus had been assigned to the Agorian front by his father, the Count of Varvao. The trolls had risen in numbers and posed a tangible threat that spring. Eager to prove himself to the Emperor, he had taken 500 legionnaires deep into the swamps to take the fight to the trolls. His men formed a fortification deep in troll territory and repelled wave after wave of the foul creatures. It was his godly void magic that tore the trolls from existence and prevented them from regenerating. His boldness quickly became folly, As the trolls outnumbered the hound scouts' reports, Severus pushed himself past his limits, but he didn't stand won the day, breaking the troll advance. He had been burnt severely in the defense, taking 207 major and apex channeling essences over the next 5 years to repair the damage and restore his magic. The Emperor's grandfather had given him every channeling essence that reached the palace, recognizing his potential. He released the channeling essence into Scorpio's outstretched hand. Master Mage Gracilis was a valuable asset, capable of disrupting enemy spells at range, but the black sphere would offer only temporary relief. He would have to push through the pain and continue fighting. Severus snapped back to the moment minutes had passed and his mind had wandered again. He looked up at Scorpio. What other news? Centurions Cornelius and Sergius are prepared to report when you are ready, Emperor, the Primus stated obediently. Why is Sergius here? Haven't the orcs invaded the Western Empire? Severus barked angrily. Too many enemies were trying to take advantage and steal the discovery of the Titan ruins. He would banish them all from existence. Primus Scorpio bowed. You ordered half of his hounds to Maca. He volunteered to accompany them, and you approved the move. That was correct, he recalled. He slowly nodded. Send them in, then. The 2 hound centurions entered almost immediately. The old Cornelius kept a straight back as he entered. He had lost hounds faster than they could be replaced. Sergius had gained weight since Severus had last seen him, though he couldn't recall exactly when that had been. Centurion Cornelius reported first. Cornelius saluted. My Emperor, the elves are licking their wounds and have stopped their advance after the last battle. They will wait for reinforcements from Esenhem after losing 2 of their powerful mages to your hand. Severus nodded impatiently. That battle had been 2 days ago, and he had not channeled that much either in decades. He had nearly burnt his channels again. Though they had won the day, his empire could not sustain 3 war fronts if this became a war of attrition. And the Barteradians? He asked Cornelius, growing impatient. Duke Tiberius is retreating to Maca to defend the excavation site. He lost half his strength defending the walls of Girakas, Cornelius reported. The Emperor slammed the table. Cornelius didn't flinch, but Sergius did. Sergius spoke, attempting to redirect the anger. Varvar has fallen to the orc clerics. Duke Tiberius failed to send reinforcements as promised. I managed to delay the fleet for 2 days longer than he requested, but I could not hold them back any longer. The Emperor turned slowly and met Centurion Sergius's eyes. The man was trying to deflect his own failure onto Tiberius. Duke Tiberius was a good commander, but he had gotten too embroiled in the political jostling all his progeny were entitled to as they fought for scraps of power. Black energy crackled around Severus as he studied the map of his empire collapsing in on itself. He looked south. What of the goblins? Sergius swallowed hard. They have not left the mountains, but the estimates are in the tens of thousands. The Emperor's hard stare forced Sergius to step back. We have time. The orcs are unlikely to advance from Varvau and will likely focus their efforts south on the map, and Table vanished in a flash of black lightning, gone in an instant. The orcs carved themselves off a quarter of the Telian Empire, and you are telling me that is a good thing. The vehemence in his voice made Sergius step back again to give him space to cool. This was not like him. In his youth, he would have puzzled out the problem and found a way to reclaim the advantage. There were too many enemies. He needed to eliminate one. He took more mental essences from his belt and put them in his mouth before Primus Scorpio could voice a warning. He needed a clear mind now more than ever. Damn the hangover. It worked. The slow, distracting thoughts were pushed away. He slowly formed a bold plan in his mind. He looked at Cornelius with clear eyes. Are you sure the elves are waiting on reinforcements? Antonia Segreto's agents in Esenhem say the ships are being loaded and provisioned now. It will be 4 days 3 if they rush hand, then 2 days to sail to our shores with the assistance of their mages, Cornelius informed him. The Emperor nodded. The elves didn't have many displacement mages, so they were unlikely to create and move through portals. Good. Get me the displacement mages. I will move my army behind the Barteradians, and we will crush them between us and Duke Tiberius in Masha. Duke Octavian can surge his forces from the excavation site and join with Tiberius Everyone in the room tensed. If the Emperor's northern army went south, the elves would have a clear path to the capital or could attack Masha from the north. The Emperor tried to ease their concerns. We will depart in secret tomorrow night, crush the Barteradian armies, and return north to confront and punish the elves again. It will be a costly battle, but we will be victorious. Cornelius was the only one brave enough to speak. Are the ruins of the Titans worth risking so much? It may be time for diplomacy, my Emperor. No. The secrets Chancellor Marcel has already recovered are too powerful and cannot be shared, the Emperor stated firmly, cutting off any attempt to persuade him otherwise. Cornelius slowly nodded. I will prepare the hounds and get messages to the dukes to mobilize for tomorrow evening. The Emperor watched the hound retreat. Cornelius had served faithfully for 4 decades, but now carried clear doubt in his eyes. After this battle, Severus would have the truth-seekers question him, perhaps replace him, even if he passed the interrogation. Centurius retreated without a word. He too would need to be replaced. His failures were mounting. Prima Scorpio cleared his throat, drawing the Emperor's attention. 6 elfbane blades have been forged and arrived yesterday. Do you want them distributed? The runic smiths can continue forging 2 every 5 days unless you wish them to focus on something else. The Emperor had 2 runic master smiths working in secret in the palace's depths. All the original elfbane black blades had been destroyed as part of the treaty with Eisenheim. Since they had broken the pact, he would punish them. No. Have them continue working on the elfbane blades. Give them to the legionnaires you believe can make the best use of them. There will be elves when we face the Barteradians tomorrow evening. Send in the dukes and mage commanders. I will personally reveal my plan to them. Primus Scorpio briefly looked alarmed but saluted and left to obey. The next night, over 5,000 legionnaires and 50,000 soldiers formed on the field outside Carenhagen. The weather mages had drawn in dense, heavy clouds to obscure their movement from the griffin riders, and a detachment of dragon riders circled high above the clouds as insurance against discovery. The Emperor was dressed in his golden runic armor. Dozens of mages moved with him toward the portal site. 7 displacement mages had already been teleported far to the south to set an anchor point. Then, 12 more would work in concert to open the portal, while the Emperor's army moved through. The Emperor marched into the circle of mages and legionnaires with an aura of confidence. He was surprised to see Chancellor Zaina there and paused to address her. You said you were returning to the capital. He recognized the runic robes she wore and wondered where she had come by the deep blue archmagi robes. The fate of the Empire is at stake, my Emperor. I will stand with you to defend it. He met her eyes and nodded. A young red-haired mage stood behind Zaina. Zaina's daughter! He thought she had perished. Perhaps she had another child. It was so hard to keep track of everyone. Primus Scorpio stood at his side and updated him. The displacement mages have successfully set the anchor and remain undetected behind the Barteradian army. The Eisenheim elves have not moved. Duke Octavian and Tiberius are ready to surge and squeeze the Barteradians between us. Did the Primus sound surprised that the plan had worked? It was a brilliant plan, Severus thought. Who's replacing Master Mage Gracilis on my left? The Emperor asked as he surveyed the assembled mages, noting Gracilis' absence. Mage Castile Duval. She is the only mage in your battalion capable of unweaving enemy spells. Gracilis is in too much pain to be reliable on the front lines. That's Castile there with her legionnaires. The Primus pointed. The name struck a chord of familiarity with Severus, but he couldn't place it. This was not the time to dwell on it. The only mage? Is Master Mage Navius not with us? He still holds your right flank. He waits to be sent through in the first wave to secure the portal, the Primus reported. Then why are we waiting here? The Emperor roared. For the Telian Empire. March to victory! Castile stood in the dark, cool night while her legionnaires moved around her on alert. The Emperor had just shouted to move out, and the Imperial legionnaires were heading into the portal to secure the valley beyond. Blaise fidgeted to her left and whispered something to Matteo. Adrian was on her right. Smells like death to me, he whispered. He knew of the plan to turn on the Emperor, and it was a veiled warning. We'll follow Zaina's lead, Castile said with a confidence she didn't feel. This was a death sentence, and Adrian knew it as well as she did. Eric got off easy, he mumbled. Castile winced at the statement. News of Eric's death had recently reached them. Benito had already started a pool on when Fortuna's son would show himself again. Castile knew better, though his luck had run out. Centurion Cornelius had confirmed to her a few hours ago that the blood sample he had for Eric didn't point anywhere. She had chosen not to tell the men. Best to let them hope their companion lived a charmed life. Hopefully, Eric's luck had rubbed off on them. They were going to need it. It was her company's turn through the portal, and they fell in tightly behind a block of soldiers. Holding this portal open for so long was going to tax the displacement mages. Organization and speed were paramount to get everyone through and mustered for the assault. That was one thing the Tellian soldiers were good at, as they moved in unison at a light jog. Exiting the portal, she spotted the Emperor standing tall in his golden armor, staring off into the distance. They had traveled hundreds of miles, and Neptune's tear was bright above them here. The blue ethereal light of the moon gave the emerging army a spectral appearance like death spreading across the land. Her job was to protect the left flank of the Emperor from enemy mage spells. She had 3 other mages with her for offensive support, but only one was part of Antonia's plan to remove the Emperor. She hoped High Mage Zinor, whoever was truly in charge of this cup, would be wise enough to wait until victory was achieved before moving against the Emperor. However, she didn't care whether the Tellian Empire survived this rebellion. She knew how powerful and vindictive the ancient Emperor was. In the last few days, she had seen him fraying, constantly losing focus. Cornelius had assured Castile that her blood samples in the archives under the Imperial Palace would be destroyed within moments of the Emperor's death reaching them. With Eric dead, they would have to find another way to destroy the secondary archives. Castile took her position and waited for the remainder of the army to arrive so the attack on the rear of the Barteradian army could begin. Zaina bit her lip and smoothed the rich blue archmagi robes she wore. The boy who had given her the robes was likely dead. Just a day before she was informed of his death, she had sent him a message that the anchor stone she had gifted to Eric had received it. But it was likely orcs who had been listening. Centurion Sergius had reported him dead, and Cornelius had confirmed it. However, the truth was they didn't have Eric's blood sample. Still, it was more likely than not that he was dead. The report stated that Hound Eric Marco had been tasked with shadowing the Caliphate Armada and had stopped communicating. Guilt racked her, and she hadn't had the heart to tell Rena, who stood at her side. It was best not to distract the young mage on the eve of battle. Zaina stood confidently at the Emperor's side and watched the endless, impressive stream of soldiers and legionnaires pour from the portal as the displacement mages strained to keep it open. The Emperor's plan would actually be brilliant if it worked. That was assuming the elves didn't move on Carenhagen and the Barteradians failed to detect them before the attack. The displacement mages would need a day or two to recover before they could send the army back. The Emperor turned to Zaina. "I am glad you are joining us. This will be my greatest victory." He appeared surprisingly lucid and focused. Zaina nodded and hoped he held it together long enough to win the day. She began mentally inventorying the mages around the Emperor. 2 were in on the plot, and the other 5 would have to perish with him if she chose to act. Rena was unaware of the plan but posed no threat to it. The night burned away into dawn as the army slowly and successfully arrived. With the army assembled, the portal collapsed along with the exhausted displacement mages. The Emperor looked over his forces and moved to the front, yelling with an etherically enhanced voice about glory and becoming legends. When his speech ended, the men cheered and moved forward, eager to win glory for the Empire. Zaina cast small fire dragons into the sky to deal with the threat. It didn't take much, just a few bursts to burn enough feathers for the beasts to spiral to the ground. After 2 were brought down, the rest of the Griffin riders retreated, but the element of surprise was lost. It was going to be a bloody engagement. Cornelius rested on a rock high above the valley from which the army was marching. A bitter taste was in his mouth, and the sugarcane stalk he chewed couldn't clear it. Years of planning had come to this end. It was not the opportune time. They still needed the Emperor's void power as both deterrent and weapon. But the stubborn old Emperor wouldn't step down while the Empire was eating itself alive from within, so there was no other choice. Centurion Sergius came and stood beside him. The vile man had been placed in his position for his blood, not his competence, and Cornelius hated him. "My hounds reported the west is clear. Just 2 rangers, and they're both dead." Didn't raise a warning. The smugness in his voice made Cornelius' skin itch. "Good. We eliminated 7 rangers to the north and west. The Barteradians are not yet aware we've arrived. Cornelius replied, matching his counterpart's tone. Sergius moved a little too close, and Cornelius stepped aside to give him room to watch the assembly below. A few moments passed before Sergius spoke again. The bone etchings tingled in Cornelius' arm. Sergius was using his spell form to detect lies. He wanted to know something, and Cornelius was ready. The archives were attacked, and my son is dead. Cornelius stepped further back and faced Sergius, his mind racing, his expression showing genuine shock. "The Barteradians?" he asked, confused. Sergius shook his head sadly, though poorly masking the anger beneath. "Unlikely. 4 hounds were killed, but of the surviving 4, none saw the assailants. The vault room was burned, all samples destroyed. Do you know who might have been responsible?" Cornelius was stunned. Was this Antonia's hand? He thought he knew everything, but wouldn't put it past the cunning woman to keep a few cards hidden. The itching in his arms increased. "No," he replied flatly, mind racing with possibilities. "Has a necromancer questioned the dead? What about Master Mage Othello? Othello could peer into the past and replay events. Has the Emperor been informed?" Cornelius added. Centurion Sergius looked disappointed by Cornelius' response. "I want answers before I tell the Emperor what has happened. Only 3 bodies were recoverable for necromancers to question. One said someone with a cat familiar attacked the archives. I have requested Master Mage Othello make the journey, but I wanted more answers first." Sergius studied him carefully. "A cat? A shapeshifter? A summoner?" Cornelius muttered, trying to piece it together. If this wasn't Antonia, were there other players he didn't know about? More likely, Antonia had a backup for Eric she hadn't told him about. Sergius stepped closer as Cornelius' mind churned. "No," Sergius said hotly. Cornelius felt a heavy pressure seize his mind, paralyzing his body. Sergius' dagger was out and in his chest in a blink. He lowered Cornelius' body behind a boulder. "It is a strong poison, my friend. It will take time to kill, but you will feel no pain. The necromancers will get the answers I want from your corpse. Rest assured, my hounds will take care of Antonia Segreto if the Emperor dies today." Cornelius' muscles were locked. He couldn't move. Sergius stood over him, looking him in the eyes. "Don't look surprised. Duke Octavian told me of your plot to place him on the Emperor's seat. I agree it is time for new guidance in the Empire, but it will not be Antonia, or you guiding it from the shadows. It will be me. And if I find out you killed my son, know this. Your soul will be tortured for all eternity." Hound Hercule approached, and Sergius turned to him. "Take his head for the necromancer, but I want to be there when his spirit is questioned." A griffin rider circled high above in the gray dawn light as Cornelius' life slipped away. He had always wondered what it would be like to fly on the back of a griffin. Hound Hercule nodded, knelt, and cut off Cornelius' head while he was still conscious. The day had been bloody, but the Telians were victorious. The Emperor watched from a distance as the armies clashed in the waning battle. He had used a great deal of ether today, and had led 3 assaults on the Barteradian lines. The first had been a brutal massacre of the baggage train and camp followers, followed by a second assault on the organized Barteradian army. Duke Tiberius and Duke Octavian had been slow to close the trap, but eventually they had. The third assault had left the Barteradians trapped between the 3 armies with nowhere to retreat. Spells of lightning, fire, and ice flashed and rolled across the field, indiscriminate in their destruction. Bodies still screamed on the field for healing, or simply for the pain to end. One of his Duke generals rode up. "Emperor, a detachment of the Barteradians is breaking east. They'll escape the encirclement." The Emperor turned to the mage on his right. The mage turned his focus inward and sent out an all-seeing eye. A moment later he said, "About 1,500 men, 2 miles east. Looks like they're surviving mages and officers." Xena offered unwanted advice. "The day is won. Most of our mages are spent. We should move north and send soldiers back to Karenhagen before the elves move. No, we'll kill every Barteradian we can today so we don't have to deal with them in the future," the Emperor said sternly, the wildness of battle adrenaline still in his eyes. He turned to another mage. "Unpack the collectors and start harvesting the dead before it's too late. Duke Octavian and Duke Tiberius can clean up here. Have them send their best legionaries in support. I will personally lead a detachment to handle the escaping Bartaradians. 20 minutes later, the Emperor led 800 mounted legionnaires and 14 mages east. He was pleased to note that Xina was among them, and the mages were actively discussing how much aether they had left. Updates came frequently. Only 100 of the fleeing Bartaradians were mounted, and they had fewer than 10 mages. How many mages had his own army lost today? He remembered the reports coming in during the battle, but he couldn't afford to split his focus knot while sending void lightning a quarter-mile into the enemy. As they caught up to the fleeing force, his cavalry slowed. They're forming a defensive line. The mage to his left announced. The Emperor nodded, slowing along with the mounted legionnaires around him. Half a mile ahead, the Bartaradians were rapidly digging pits to break the cavalry charge. Sandy dirt flew into the air as they scrambled to prepare some kind of defense. Severus signaled a halt. Best to soften them up first. The Emperor rode forward and scanned the enemy, mostly humans, with a few elves and dwarves among them. They noticed his golden armor, and he could feel their fear even from a distance. They had likely seen him wreak destruction during the battle earlier with his void lightning. At this extreme range, there were only a handful of mages in all of Dazia who could extend their offensive spells. The Emperor dismounted, and the others followed his lead. He drew on his ether core, weaving the spell forms, layer after layer, over the span of heartbeats. He frowned, had made an error, and had to start again. The second time, he succeeded. Black lightning danced between his hands, fed from his aether core, and nearby mounts stamped nervously at the unnatural void magic forming. Emperor Maximus Augustus Severus released the spell. A black web of lightning raced across the distance, spreading out in a wave of destruction. Some of the lightning struck the ground, leaving deep holes. Some shot into the sky, leaving afterimages and thunderclaps for the observers, but over half of the black tendrils reached the Bartaradians. Screams erupted as men suddenly sported holes in their bodies, and the lightning raced through their ranks. He fed the spell forms until his either ran dangerously low, and his channels edged closer to burning. Breathing heavily from the day's expenditure, he smiled. At least a quarter dead. He looked to his mages. Finish them. Xina nodded, a frown on her face, and began layering her spell forms, creating a twisting, growing fire. As the dragon of fire formed, the legionnaires prepared to charge behind it. The fire dragon shot into the scythe and came back down, engulfing Master Mage Naevius in an inferno. The Emperor was confused for a moment as his mind processed the screams of the burning mage. Then, his Imperial legionnaires were suddenly assaulted by other legionnaires. Chaos reigned, and confusion clouded the Emperor's mind. Was a powerful mind mage controlling his men? A lance of fire shot toward his chest from Xina's hands. His etheric shield flashed in defense, draining his amulet. Severus reached for either to form a void shield as Primus Scorpio shouted. His void shield formed, but the weave dissolved as another blast of fire slammed into his armor. The runic etchings flared in defense, but the armor still heated, burning him inside. Xina was screaming orders to the other mages as she pulled back. Primus Scorpio dismounted and helped his Emperor to his feet. We need to run. Some of the mages have betrayed you. The Imperial legionnaires outnumber them, but they're targeting your loyal mages. He wasn't going to run. He drew his blade and located the mage interfering with his void magic. The mithril blade reflected sunlight as lightning, fire, and explosions erupted across the battlefield, men struggling to tell friend from foe. The Emperor roared in fury and charged the mage, who was guarded by lesser legionnaires. It had been years since he wielded the ancient blade, but he would put it to use today. Scorpio gave up trying to make his Emperor flee, and instead ordered the loyal legionnaires to defend him as Severus sought vengeance for the betrayal. The Emperor closed in on the sweating mage. Her legionnaires moved to protect her, but he was undeterred. The ground erupted in a fiery blast around him, but his armor held, keeping him upright as he advanced ready to deliver justice. Xina would be next. Castile watched as the Emperor walked toward her. They had tried and failed. Imperial legionnaires had sealed off Xina and the other conspiratorial mages, their runic armor dulling the magical attacks. Only 7 men remained from her company, guarding her from the Emperor's wrath. Constantine had been loaned to the hounds to scout for the army. Mallory and Dante had fallen in the battle earlier that day. Firth and Linus had been too injured to ride, and hadn't joined this fight. That was a blessing Firth would have fallen to Adrian's blade when the betrayal began. Adrian was keeping an eye on Wiley, who was currently stunned by the chaos. If they could avoid killing a comrade, all the better. Fire and earth erupted around the Emperor as Xina tried to slow him, but she had her own problems. The Imperial Legionnaires outnumbered them 2-1. Xina diverted her attention briefly to send out a shadow chain, opening the defense of one of the Legionnaires so Benito could drive his spear under the man's chin. Calm fell to his knees to her left, his leg buckling from a powerful low blow. Blaze, next to her, muttered to no one in particular, "Any chance you have a few arrows?" He had been deadly with his shots, striking Legionnaires in the neck through gaps in their armor, but was down to just a few. Adrian stepped forward to face the Emperor, rather than let him get close to Castile. The Emperor was sloppy with his blade, but faster and stronger than Adrian. Adrian's runic sword, once Delmar's, scratched the golden armor, but it didn't matter. The Emperor grabbed his wrist and drove the mithril weapon into Adrian's abdomen. Time slowed for Castile as Adrian punched the Emperor repeatedly in the face with his free hand. If they survived this, it would have been a funny story punching the Emperor of the Tellian Empire in the face. But she already knew that time was not likely to come. The Emperor jerked the blade free and kicked Adrian away with remarkable agility for someone wearing heavy golden armor. Adrian clutched at his stomach as he tumbled. He reached for a lesser potion, but Castile knew the wound was too broad and deep. Blood poured from his mouth as he struggled to drink, his lungs likely destroyed. She had no time to watch her loyal friend die. She was too busy preventing the Emperor from casting void magic. He was coming for her next. To her right, Calm's helm was crushed by a heavy blade. The ground suddenly softened beneath every combatant in front of her, causing them, including the Emperor, to sink several inches. His advance was paused. Then, just as suddenly, the soft earth hardened again. A young, familiar red-haired maga heaving for breath, a short distance behind Xina Castile's attention. She hadn't known Rena was part of the conspiracy. Her intervention couldn't have come at a better time. Benito and Mateo, out of range of the spell, darted among the immobilized Imperial Legionnaires, whose feet were trapped in hardened earth and unable to turn. A wave of fire swept across 24 more Imperial Legionnaires, cooking them inside their armor and forcing them to fall back. Prima Scorpio was screaming for the others to kill her. They knew Castile was the one holding back the Emperor's void magic. The Emperor was using his mithril blade to free his feet. A thunder of hooves sounded in the distance. Castile turned to see Duke Octavian leading a cavalry charge, 50 legionnaires behind him, all bearing his house crest instead of the sigil of the Legion of the Lion. It was truly over then. The Emperor looked relieved, seeing his son rush to his aid. But when the charge reached them, Octavian's men targeted the Imperial Legionnaires, not the traitors. The Emperor roared in rage, his voice magnified by the etheric weave in his armor. Prima Scorpio had freed his legs, leaving his boots cemented in the hardened earth. Mateo and Benito moved to shield Castile. After 4 quick exchanges, Benito was bleeding from a neck wound, and Mateo's sword arm had been cut to the bone through his vambrace. Castile's concentration shifted fully to the Primus, her etheric shadow chains trying to bind him. Her ether was dangerously low now. Her focus was no longer on the Emperor. Her gaze flicked to Adrian's vacant eyes. It wouldn't be long before she joined him. The traitorous mage had shifted her attention away from him, probably spent. Severus turned and immediately formed and released void lightning at Xina. Her etheric shield flared as it tried to stop the assault, but quickly failed. Her blue robes scorched and sizzled as the void lightning cracked against the powerful artifact, uselessly. He could recover from being burnt that had done it before. Finally, an arc of the random black lightning darted into Xina's unprotected face. A hole appeared through her eye and out the back of her head. She slowly collapsed to the ground. The young red-haired mage who had been standing behind her froze in shock. Her time would come too. Severus swore. He looked around the battlefield, which had been slowly turning in favor of the traitors. That would end now that he had his void magic back. How had that malicious son of his convinced so many of his people to support him? He would find out soon. He found Octavian on the perimeter of the battle and prepared to end him next. He ignored the burning in his body and channeled aether and nothing. He turned sharply as his spell forms dissolved again. So the mage wasn't finished. Well, he wouldn't make the mistake of leaving her alive again. He watched as a one-handed legionnaire drove a sword through Scorpio's eye while shadow chains bound the Primus in place. The traitorous mage was blocking his ether shaping once again. A shout from his right alerted him the Barteradians were forming a line to charge. Dozens of men hesitated, unsure of what to do. The traitors pulled back first but didn't retreat. They were placing the Emperor and his loyal men between themselves and the Barteradians. There was a call from some of his Imperial legionnaires to gather horses. An unfamiliar legionnaire forced reins into his hands. "Emperor, ride to safety. We will guard your retreat." He pulled his aching body into the saddle, his aether channels burning. 9 other legionnaires mounted alongside him. 100 of his loyal men still stood. The Emperor turned to burn the faces of the traitors into his memory. An arrow pierced the eye slit of his helm. His head jerked back as he tried to register what had just happened. The arrow jutted from his helm as he turned his head in confusion. Silence seemed to fall across the field as the Emperor slowly slid from his horse and hit the ground. The Imperial legionnaires circled to defend their fallen Emperor. Some called for healing mages or potions, but no loyal mages remained, and all the potions had been used. Octavian pulled the other legionnaires back from the onrushing Barteradians. They would finish the job, but not all the legionnaires and remaining mages retreated with Octavian. Castile and her 5 surviving legionnaires moved into the dense woodlands. Wiley remained numb, in shock at what had just happened. Blaze was still in disbelief that he had just killed the Emperor. Lurkin limped, severely bloodied. Benito, his neck wound wrapped, hobbled forward with help from Mateo, whose right arm was shattered and unusable. In his good hand, Mateo carried Primus Scorpio's runic weapon with a grin on his face. Raelia was prepared for the worst-case scenario. With her fate in the Legionnaire's hands, anything was possible. She truly thought he would turn her over to his mage commander, making her a prisoner of the Tellians. She was surprised when she appeared in a dark forest in the light of a single glowstone held by the Legionnaire. Eric hadn't betrayed her. She slowly relaxed, not sensing any danger. Her breath clouded in front of her in the still, cold air. "We are out of the dungeon?" she asked Eric. She resisted wincing at the stupidity of the question. Dispassionately, Eric responded. We are about 20 miles west of Parvis. Do you know where that is?" Raelia took his flat, unemotional tone to mean that Maveth had not made it. Taking in her surroundings, she asked with a note of sorrow, "I know where Parvis is. Did Maveth not make it?" Eric looked annoyed at her question. "Maveth is sleeping," he gestured behind him. "My company and my mage commander aren't far off. You should get going. I suggest traveling south, crossing the river, and then making your way home." Her pack appeared in his outstretched hand. "Food and some fragile items are inside, so treat the pack with care. You should make haste." He gestured behind him again at the unseen danger of his mage commander. Raelia ground her teeth a little. After 2 weeks of fighting together in the most dangerous dungeon she had ever heard of, now he was tossing her away with no parting words, not even a thank you. She then realized that for her, it had only been a heartbeat since he had placed her in his space. Eric looked exhausted, and maybe in pain. What had he been through in the days, weeks, or months she had been imprisoned? At least he had kept his promise. Not that she liked him, though he wasn't terrible looking for a human. Well, as long as he wasn't wearing the Red Legion armor, what was she thinking? He had killed Veril. She hardened her resolve. She sheathed her blades and took a few steps forward to take her pack. The weight surprised her and she fumbled it briefly. Eric winced when she almost dropped it. She shouldered the pack and was about to turn, but paused. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, he hadn't killed her the 2 times they had fought. He was not a terrible human. A bit of an ogre's ass, but not a bad human. "If you are ever captured," she paused, considering her words, "ask for General Clallenglavian. I will tell my brother you helped me, and he will ensure you end up in a work camp instead of being strung up with the other legionnaires." "What a generous offer," he said with a mocking undertone. Raelia winced as she realized what she had said. Of course, she would free him from the work camp if she learned he had been captured. She hadn't said that aloud, but thought it was implied. She rolled her eyes at him rather than clarify, since she doubted she would ever see this legionnaire again. She waited to see if he would say anything else. When he didn't, she checked the position of the moon and tramped off into the snow. Strangely, she didn't feel like she was turning her back on an enemy. The snow crunched under her feet as she made her way south. She increased her pace, needing to gain distance from his mage commander. It was too easy to be tracked in the snow. Raelia pushed herself hard for hours, till she reached the river. Crossing the icy flow was going to be unpleasant. She hoped he had given her at least 2 water skins she could empty and use as floats. She started to unpack and froze. That stupid bastard. She cradled the griffin egg and pulsed ether into it. The faint stirrings were still there. Whatever reason he had for keeping the griffin egg was secondary. He had wrapped it carefully, but still, the freezing temperature could have killed the unhatched chick. She came up with 1,000 things to say when she saw Eric again, none of them pleasant. Then she reeled herself in, realizing she was looking forward to interacting with him again. Not just to yell at him for his lack of knowledge, but to banter with him. How could someone be so irritating? She spent the next hour securing the egg inside a ranger's cloak. Another priceless gift the infuriating legionnaire had given her like an old pair of socks. She made a cradle to carry the egg in front of her. She could only guess at the age of the egg, and estimated it would hatch in 2 or 3 months. At least there were 3 Legion canteens in her pack. 2 canteens were full of water. When she poured out the third, the distinct odor of alcohol filled the air. Rather than waste it, she sipped it and frowned. Where did he get elven ambrosia? And he stored it in a soldier's canteen. The idiot was wasting priceless ambrosia that took a century to age. She bit her tongue and cursed him inwardly as she dumped the contents into the snow. It would make floating across much less dangerous, and right now, her life was more important than elven whiskey. When black spheres with orange and red swirls rolled out of a cloth bag, Raelia's jaw dropped. An Apex and Major Affinity Fire essences. Had Eric put these in her bag? No, it must have been Mavith. No, Eric controlled all the essences, and Mavith always deferred to him. For some reason, the priceless essences enraged her further. That bastard had tilted their relationship in his favor even further. Who gives affinity essences away like candy? An idiot, that is who. She still had the charm essences from the harpies, but she was waiting to consume them. Unlocking a new affinity was not going to be pleasant, and it might be better to sell them. She was not going to raise her charm affinity high enough to learn a spell form anyway. When night arrived, Raelia stripped naked, packed everything in her pack, and wrapped it tightly with a tarp tent. She attached the canteens as floats and walked hesitantly into the water, pushing the pack before her as the icy water sapped the heat from her body. She needed to get across the river before cramps set in and she drowned. She kicked furiously among the floating chunks of ice as she crossed the river, pushing her precious package. She pushed any thoughts of the horrors that might be lurking in the river's depths to the back of her mind. Best to just cross quickly. Exhausted from reaching the far side, she dragged her naked body from the water up the bank. Ice was already forming on her body, and she cursed Eric for taking her thermal stone. Her spell formed to heat the air around her was weak, acting too slowly to warm her body as she shivered. Her numb fingers retrieved the Apex Fire essence and placed it in her mouth. Heat surged through her body, forcing away the cold. She hadn't been sure that would work, but thankfully it did. If the Legionnaire had been there, she would have acted like she knew it would happen. She fumbled through her pack, happy everything had remained dry. Once she was dressed, she wrapped the griffin egg securely in her cloak. The artifact should keep the egg warm, but she would check every hour. She was already growing attached to the unhatched chick. As she moved carefully through the woods toward Barteradian lands, she found herself looking forward to training a griffin again. She even came up with a name for the unhatched griffin, Baldo. It was a Tellian word for a foolish person. So what if she was naming her griffin after the legionnaire who had given her the egg? Her journey through the Tellian wilds over the next week went relatively well. It had gotten so cold one night that she had risked a fire and attracted a gnoll hunting party. She had used a fireball to disperse the gnolls, killing 3, and had run for the rest of the night, worried the burnt survivors would return with more of their pack. At least there was no snow on the ground this far east. The effort of constantly avoiding Tellian towns and patrols had Raelia on edge. Twice, she had covered her ears and pretended to be a malnourished civilian to walk the roads. She used the griffin egg to bulge her belly, as even in the Tellian Empire pregnant women should be able to travel relatively unmolested. It was a risk, but the road saved her valuable time, and the hounds would be patrolling the woodlands this far east. The most stressful moment was when two mage companies passed her on the road. That convinced her that perhaps she was taking too much of a risk. She knew she was only about 200 miles from the border when she left the road. She used the ranger's call as she approached, a short, common bird sound repeated at specific intervals. After half a day, it allowed the rangers to find her. Her knees nearly gave out from relief when two tall elven rangers revealed themselves. "Little woman, what are you doing in my woods?" one of the rangers asked with a good-natured smirk. She missed elven humor. It was refreshing after dealing with the human. Raelia drew on her elven fortitude and stood tall. "I fell off my griffin and had to walk," she replied snarkily. She bowed formally and introduced herself. "Raelia Glavian, trained griffin rider and ranger. I request an escort to my brother, General Caelora Glavian." The two elves looked doubtful, even when she revealed her elven features. It was another week until she was back in a Barteradian city. The Telhyans had captured the city of Girakas, and the war was in full bloom. She learned the Barteradians and Ezenham elves were entering a loose alliance to capture a valuable target. She was not told what it was, but she learned it was outside the city of Maka, that accursed city where she had lost Moonclaw, and nearly died, and where Eric had spared her life. Her brother finally debriefed her. She was glad it was him, and not the ranger commander. Clellan entered the room where she was under guard, and they hugged each other fiercely. "Raelia, when I heard the rangers were bringing you from the wilds, I couldn't believe it. Where have you been for the last 3 months?" "Trapped in the elven city of Caelora. There is an ancient dungeon there, larger and more powerful than any dungeon I have ever seen," Raelia responded. She knew she needed to give something valuable to the Barteradian command after failing to protect Veril. Clellan frowned. "You were in a dungeon? We know Veril is dead. The rangers I sent found his body 2 months ago near a decaying wyvern and Tellian drake." "Do you know what happened to Traelion? The mages at the college have not been able to contact him for 6 weeks." She was surprised that it was her brother questioning her and not an inquisitor. She was glad it was him, but still she was surprised. "I haven't seen Traelion since he brought me to Veril. I have recovered enough to rejoin the rangers. But I have also procured my own griffin egg from the dungeon," Clellan asked. He had clearly been made aware of all her possessions already, judging by his lack of surprise. "The egg and all her gear were in the next room. The charm essences were there as well, but she had consumed the second fire essence." "No," she said before thinking it through. She actually didn't know where Eric had obtained the egg. Clellan nodded heavily, and Raelia read his body language. He was about to give her some bad news. Was he going to take the egg from her? The breeding program should be producing enough griffins, unless the war was going much worse than she assumed. "You are not returning to the rangers. Father has arranged for you to be sent to live with an aunt in Arteria." As soon as Raelia heard the news, her eyes widened. "The capital of Ezenham? Why?" she asked, confused but quickly angering. "To protect you. With your prior failures and now Traelion missing, people want answers. Powerful people, Raelia. An inquisitor will question you, and then you will be sent to Arteria to be a liaison for House Glavian. The charm essences will most assuredly be appropriated, though." It was like Raelia had just crashed her griffin into a cliff face. Her family had left Ezenham hundreds of years ago because the Ezenham regents had refused to fight the Telhyans. Now, she was being sent there for her protection. "Why?" she asked numbly. "Ezenham and Barteradia are allies, at least for now. We've even managed to coordinate with the supreme cleric of the Bhutan Caliphate to stretch the resources of the Telhyans as his orc warlords attack the Western Telhyan Empire. The Telhyan Empire will crumble in the coming years." As Clellan said this, Raelia wondered why she was worrying about the stupid legionnaire's fate. When Clellan left, she spoke with the inquisitors. There were 2, a pleasant old human woman named Kiara, and a young, dark-haired dwarf named Brer. They were just as interested in the shimmering labyrinth as they were in clues to the whereabouts of Traelion Kelran and the human legionnaire. She couldn't keep the legionnaire's powerful space affinities secret from them. They already knew about it, but still, both the dwarfs' and humans' questions indicated they doubted her words. Raelia could only tell the truth, but surprisingly, she kept some of his secrets. the powerful essence collector and his other spell forms. She didn't hide the fact that he was not a Telian and, in fact, an otherworlder, conscripted into the Legion. Maybe that would help him gain some leniency if he were captured. Caelora seemed to think that Eric being an otherworlder explained a lot, but Realia had never heard of an otherworlder with such a strong affinity. After 2 days of intense questioning, she was finally allowed to walk freely in the city. Her rank had been stripped, and she would never serve as a griffin rider or ranger again in the kingdom of Bartaradia. Clallan did not see her off to Arteria. He was training a detachment for the spring assault on Moksha. Everything was very secret, and she had no inroads to the alliance or the goals of the assault. She only knew this was the largest offensive the Bartaradians had amassed in decades. They were determined to keep something from Telian hands, and it was not the shimmering labyrinth. Numerous scholars eagerly came to find her to ask her more questions about the dungeon before she left. When she was ordered to depart for Ezenham, she was directed to a horse-drawn carriage. A wizened old elf sat in the sturdy coach. The woman's immaculate dress and brilliant jewelry reminded Realia of the nobles in the Bartaradian courts. She looked at Realia and ordered impatiently, "Get up, girl. I am eager to finish my business and be on my way back to Arteria." After Realia sat, she noticed her ranger's cloak wrapping an overweight object on the seat. Her worn pack was on the floor. Maybe her other possessions were there. "Yes, your brother made sure it traveled with you. I am Marilia Glavian, your aunt. You will be staying with me while we try to repair the relations between our fractured families. During the trip home, we need to make sure you are presentable to the other Ezenham regents." I started to help Maveth secure his homestead so we could depart and search for his sister in Orc lands. Outside, Maveth was pulling down the stretched weasel pelts and relaying the battle of how he and Leonis had hunted the 2 creatures down. They were the young ones that had formed a mated pair and recently laired nearby. I didn't want to worry about a litter of giant weasels in a few months, so we trapped one and killed the second one when it came to free its mate. I could hear the anxiousness in his voice, which was highlighted by the speed at which he was working. I still had the 2 weasel pelts I had purchased from Maveth with Legion ration bars. They were still my favorite sleeping accompaniment with the griffin down pillow under my head, not that I had much time for restful sleep recently. Maveth wasn't taking the pelts, and I didn't offer to store them. In fact, I was considering clearing out my dimensional space for Ginger. It was going to be hard enough traveling the Empire with a Goliath. A healthy warhorse was even more conspicuous. "Who did you imprison in your space this time, Eric?" The Goliath's deep voice bellowed in admonishment as he secured the giant weasel pelts in a stone chest to protect them from vermin and the elements. Ginger neighed at me, and I chose to think she was supporting me and not Maveth, even though it sounded like she was agreeing with him. "A young girl, her brother, their mother, and a first citizen mage," I replied casually. "You forced women and children into your space." "Eric, I thought better of you," Maveth chided me. This time, I was sure Ginger was siding with Maveth as she nudged me hard in the side with her head. I was a bit exasperated with his viewpoint. I was doing the best I could. It was either that or kill them. I need to get them outside the Empire. I doubt anyone would come searching for them, but if I release them in the Empire, it might cause me problems. None of them can identify me, but if they are interrogated, it will most certainly lead back to me since I was tasked with killing them. Maveth nodded slowly, accepting my explanation. It didn't take us long to secure Maveth's stone cabin and prepare a massive pack for him. Maveth wedged some stones into the wooden door and nodded that he was ready, eagerness and trepidation in his eyes. I led Ginger as we started walking. Maveth seemed to calm and asked, "What of the Goliaths who told you my sister lives?" "I sent them here. They might not have made it. The wilds are dangerous, and many towns and cities are along the road. I told them to use Duchess Veronica's name if they were captured." When I finished talking, Maveth's brow furrowed in thought. "Then I should talk with Duchess Veronica before we leave." Maveth nodded firmly. "We play checkers when I report to her, so I am sure she would tell me if there is word of Goliath." I slowed my steps and Ginger took it to mean that it was time for an apple. She nudged my back to make an apple appear. "You can't reveal I am alive, Maveth. The hounds think I am dead, so the Empire thinks I am dead. I prefer that it remains that way," I told the Goliath, handing greedy Ginger an apple. "I would not betray you, Eric, Mavith's eyes brightened with a plan. Mavith's eyes brightened with a plan. The Duchess knows I am waiting for you to travel home. I will tell her the news of your death came to me. My left eyebrow rose in doubt. Who told you I was dead then? Mavith acknowledged his mistake and continued formulating a plan. The news of his sister had clearly rattled him, as he normally thought things out. I can see the problem. I will not tell her I am leaving, as I would not have been informed of your unfortunate death. But I must know if she is aware of the Goliaths. If they need aid, we should give it to them before finding Zorana. You can wait for me with Ginger while I talk with Veronica. I nodded. I wanted to know what the Duchess knew as well. Was she aware of the plot, and that the backup archives had been destroyed? We traveled south towards Sobril. Mavith asked. How are we going to get into the Bhutan Caliphate? His hand rested on his runic hammer as he scanned the woods. He had been smart, and rubbed charcoal into the head, obfuscating its brilliant polish. I had given this a lot of thought, and had devised a plan. Unless we are going to shapeshift into orcs, we need to enter as members of the Adventurers Guild. Just like in the Telian Empire, adventurers from outside the territory are allowed to delve into their dungeons. Goliaths don't become adventurers, Eric, Mavith said tersely, already putting holes in my plan. I stopped walking and looked at the Goliath. Why not? Mavith stopped with me, appearing introspective. I actually don't know. It is just frowned upon by my people. If I had to consider it, then I think it is because adventurers only care about one thing: gold. Goliaths care more about family, friendship, and only killing for a purpose. I didn't know what to say, so we walked in silence for a while. Finally, Mavith spoke again after much consideration. I don't see why I couldn't join the Adventurers Guild. If it is what is required of me to save my sister, I will do it. Other Goliaths will not look at me favorably, though. We cannot take any assignments that I disagree with. Mavith had to think out a path to rationalize his decision to join the Adventurers Guild. Relieved, I didn't hesitate. Agreed. The weight of Mavith's trust in me made me worried that we might not find his sister, or worse, that we might find out she was dead. Still, I was leaving the Empire and felt it was a worthy cause. Risking my life for a friend was better than dying for an empire that cared nothing for me, nor I for it. After you talk with the Duchess, we will travel up the old trade road to the capital, and seek passage on one of the Adventurers Guild ships. If we are lucky, a ship captain I am familiar with will be there. Her name is Desdemona, although I don't think she likes me very much, Mavith grunted. Did you store Desdemona in your space without her permission as well? No, adventurers just don't like legionnaires, I retorted. But Mavith was already grinning at his joke. I was glad he was slowly relaxing after learning his sister might be alive. I grunted at his poor humor and walked into a clearing. I will wait here. There are some early spring plants I can harvest for my alchemy. And yes, I am sort of an alchemist now. Hurry and talk to the Duchess so we can head east and make the trade road before dark. Mavith dropped his pack, and I stored it in my dimensional space as he walked toward the city. I let Ginger wander and eat grass while I collected valuable spring flora. Mavith returned late in the evening at a light jog. I went on alert, but he put me at ease. I am sorry it took so long. I learned my friend Eric was killed by the Bhutan orcs, and needed to show an appropriate amount of grief at the news. The Duchess even hugged me and soothed me personally. How much soothing did she do? I asked teasingly, trying to needle him after he had ribbed me about my relationship with Desdemona. She hugged me for a few minutes and rubbed my back, but her arms barely encircled my chest. A few minutes? I chided, surprised. I think Mavith flushed, but it was hard to tell with his gray skin. Over the last month I have counted her as a friend. She confides in me about her troubles of running the duchy while we play checkers, and I tell her about my past adventures, Mavith said thoughtfully. And yes, the Goliaths are being escorted to her. 2 were injured in their travels, but are healthy now. They were captured 5 days ago in Freira. She just learned of them 2 days ago, and was waiting for my visit to tell me about them. She is now arranging for them to be ported to Parvus and then escorted here. She will care for them and help them get home, Mavith said, relief evident in his voice. My jaw was slack. Did the Duchess have a crush on Mavith? Was he too oblivious to realize it? I wasn't the best at reading the body language and cues of the opposite sex, but it certainly sounded like the Duchess was sweet on the big, bald, gray man. Is she happy when she sees you? I probed as we started moving east. Ginger was requesting another apple, but I ignored her. 4 was her limit today. She said our meetings are the only time she feels happy enough to smile and laugh openly. Her brother went to the capital, but her mother remains a guest and a source of her angst. Veronica even mentioned I could stay in the Citadel if I wanted to, Mavith said cheerfully. I shook my head but didn't pry further. Sometimes ignorance was best. Mavil returned to Sobril, and the Duchess might not survive the war. When we reached the white marble markers indicating the border of the Duchess's lands, we followed them to the old trade road. Are you sure we shouldn't just follow the river, Eric? Asked Maveth, voicing his reluctance at the path I had chosen. I asked while slapping a spring fly on my neck. Maveth voiced his concerns. Both dire wolves will have just had their spring litters, and will be looking to feed their pups. I am not ashamed to say that I hope never to see Caelora again. Do you plan to raid the library when we pass? Some fear seeped into his tone. This is the fastest way. If we followed the river, it would add 60 miles to our trek, I reassured him. I don't plan for us to go anywhere near the ruins, Mavith. Mavith nodded in relief. As if in response, his stomach rumbled in hunger. It took me a moment to puzzle out why that didn't make sense to me. Where is your ring of sustenance? Mavith pulled a leather cord out from under his shirt, the shiny ring dangling from it. I wore it for 2 months, but found I preferred feeling hungry and the joy of eating. He put on a wide smile. I shook my head, but I had to agree with him. The ring did kill your appetite and make you feel full much quicker. Sometimes, food even tasted bland if you were already satiated. I produced a burrito and handed it to him. Put it on, Maveth. We may not be at risk of starving, but with just 2 of us, the reduced sleep the ring requires will be invaluable in our journey. Maveth finished the burrito in 3 bites, moaning in delight at the unfamiliar blending of flavors, and I handed him a second. If I must, he said, sighing sadly. He worked the ring onto his large finger as he ate the second burrito, chewing a little more slowly, needing 4 bites this time. It would still take a week for the ring to acclimate to him, but when it did, we would need only 2 hours of sleep and 1 meal a day to sustain our bodies. With night coming soon, we started to look for somewhere to camp. Mavith asked. Are you not going to ride Ginger? I don't have a saddle, and I wouldn't be able to use my new spell form if I did. I learned my Earth Affinity spell form. It is called Earth Speak. I have been checking our surroundings as we travel. I tried to act like it was no big deal. Mavith frowned and said, Sounding hurt, you didn't learn Shapestone? That was Mavith's spell form, and I think he wanted us to match. No. This spell form allows me to send out an etheric pulse of earth-laced ether to get an instant image of my surroundings, I informed him, expecting him to be impressed. He was not. I know what it does. A few Goliath hunters use it to find burrows in my village. It has a limited range, Mavith said apprehensively. Yeah, I know being able to see out only 60 feet is a limitation, but I still manage, I said smugly. I kept walking as Mavith stopped, stunned. It took a moment for Mavith to recover and catch up. 60 feet? What is your Earth Affinity? He bellowed loud enough for everyone within half a mile to hear him. I spent the next 3 hours proving to Mavith that my range was over 50 feet. I found small animals and even told him where he could find a silver coin 20 paces off the road. As night quickly closed in, we moved off the road, Mavith still in disbelief. You see so much with each earth pulse. How do you interpret what you see so quickly? He said, cleaning off the silver coin he had dug up. Mavith didn't care about coins, but this one was ancient, and he wanted to see the stamped images for their historical value. It appeared to be a Tellian coin featuring an image of a lion on one side, and a portrait of a strong-looking man on the other. The script had worn away. I motioned my distracted friend into some heavy thickets that would be defensible as a camp. Mavith had been awfully vocal today, and I think he missed talking to me, but we were getting closer to dire wolf territory. As we set up camp, I finally answered him. Lots of practice. Mavith looked confused. How do you not get overwhelmed? From my understanding, Earth Speak shows you everything. I thought about how I was doing it as I handed Mavith his pack from my dimensional space. Before I send out the pulse, I have already focused on where I am looking. I hold the image and study it. If I see something interesting, I refocus and pulse again. With Earth Speak inscribed on my core, I can pulse 2 or 3 times a second now and even pick up movement. For the first time since I had met Mavaeth, he looked jealous. As he set up his bedroll, I set trip alarms outside our campsite and sprinkled myconid powder in a wide arc. After I was done, I found Mavaeth already eating. I hitched Ginger's lead line to a thick bush and wondered how she would react to being placed in my dimensional space. I got myself comfortable on the ground next to Mavaeth, a rock supporting my back as I took watch. "Do you want this?" I held up the dreamscape amulet for Mavaeth. He considered for a long moment, before nodding slightly. "Yes, I will practice against the orcs and tell my sister we are coming for her." "Mavaeth, that is not how it works," I said, concerned. Was I setting him up for major disappointment? Mavaeth mumbled softly. "I know, Eric. I just need to talk to her." I didn't say anything else and let him sleep. In a few days the ring would cut his sleep down, but moving in the dark of night was dangerous for the two of us in this region. I missed my hound goggles. The night went by quickly, with only insects and owls speaking to me. My Earth Speak allowed me to see the nightly foragers emerge. Mavaeth came out of the dreamscape twice to check on me, and both times I sent him back. I needed to plan our next steps. Getting out of the Empire was not going to be easy. "You shouldn't have let me sleep the whole night," Mavaeth grumbled, as light, misty fog rolled in with the morning. I waved off his concern. The fog felt a little unnatural for this time of year, but a lot of mornings had felt that way recently. "I am fine, Mavaeth. I am going to woke Ginger and pick up my alarms." Mavaeth dug into his pack for breakfast as I moved away. Ginger was probing me for an apple. "Just grass this morning," I told her, and she immediately looked indignant. As I worked, she eventually took to grazing. I sent out Earth Speak pulses, only detecting 2 deer bedded down in a small gully nearby. Back on the road, Mavaeth was chipper from his great night of sleep, and thankfully talking in a whisper as we walked. Well, a whisper for him. The mist cleared and the azure sky showed itself. Birdsong filled the woods as we walked. Mavaeth had the right side and I had the left, but I occasionally focused my Earth Speak pulse on his side of the road. Before midday, we encountered our first dire wolf tracks, but there were 4 of them, I added unhappily. Mavaeth, a little distressed, added, "If the females had their litters, the males will be hunting day and night to feed them while they nurse." He looked back at Ginger. "Dire wolves have a fixation on horse meat." Ginger huffed indignantly. I couldn't tell if she understood Mavaeth's words or his body language and tone. "Griffins like horse meat too, but don't worry, girl. I won't let them get to you." I pulled my black spear from my dimensional space to carry with me before we continued. The dire wolf tracks crossed the road frequently, and we even found a blood trail. Mavaeth stooped and pressed the large splotch. "We are lucky." "It is still tacky. They got some prey last night and probably won't be hunting again so soon." "We should increase our pace," I agreed, and all 3 of us broke into a jog. The echoing of Ginger's shoes on the ancient pavers had me on edge, but haste was our ally. We covered over 15 miles in the afternoon, and hadn't seen any tracks for the last few miles. We were approaching the site of the abandoned wagons where the company had discovered the lockbox, and I had Mavaeth hold Ginger's reins while I looked upon the site again. It looked the same as I approached, and sent out Earth Speak. Rusting metal items and bones were littered a few inches under the soft earth around the site. Scavengers had disrupted whole skeletons, but I located 9 different skulls as I fine-tuned my feedback from the spell. Castile seemed to think there was something extremely odd about this scene, but I didn't find anything noteworthy. I searched for something besides some clusters of coins, probably coin purses of the dead. I dug a little and retrieved 6 gold, 9 large silver, 76 silver, and dozens of copper coins, large and small. I didn't need the coin, but it never hurt to have more. The mystery of what had ambushed and killed these traitors still remained. I returned and let Mavaeth clean the coins while I scouted ahead. 2 hours later, I yanked on Mavaeth's leathers and pulled him off the road. He shoved the coppers he had been cleaning into his rough linen pants. "What?" he hissed. 2 men about 50 feet ahead, just off the road," I stated, as I tied an easy-pull halter hitch for Ginger. "Bandits?" Mavaeth asked, confused. I was also confused. as we hadn't seen any wagons, horses, or human tracks. Maybe hounds or Barteradian rangers. Both figures are prone. Give me a moment. My earth speak doesn't work well through flora and fauna. I focused and pulsed multiple times before I started to relax. One of them is dead, and the other is close to it. I can't discern their races. Wait here. I walked cautiously up the road while Maveth prepared his bow in support. Ginger seemed confused as she didn't sense or see any danger. The two bodies were concealed off the road, but I could easily follow their tracks and dried blood. Days old. They had come south from the ruins of Caelora. Maybe they were men who had thought to raid the city. I walked over to them and lowered my spear to the one who still lived. He had a runic sword clutched in his hand that was caked in dried blood. He smelled of rot as well, and I could see a larva moving in a massive chest wound. He was not going to live much longer. I poked him with the spear, and his eyes flashed open. He coughed painfully and weakly. He was middle-aged with graying hair. His dead companion was very young and didn't look like a warrior. Maybe a servant. He was missing his right arm, and had been dead for days, judging by the smell and maggots. The man rasped. I stepped on his sword and knelt, tilting a canteen into his mouth. He struggled to swallow, and most of the water was wasted. Once he could swallow, I dribbled an orc healing potion into his mouth. He was too far gone to realize the foul taste. It wasn't going to save his life but prolong it so I could get answers and decide if he needed saving. He was fairly delirious at the moment, and I did not recognize him. Maveth appeared behind me while I tended to the man, waiting for him to speak. I waved Maveth back as I didn't want the man to see the Goliath. I was dressed in common clothes and fairly plain-looking. Maveth understood I didn't want him to be seen and led Ginger a short distance down the road. "Why are you here?" I asked softly. His eyes couldn't focus and he kept trying to wet his throat and tongue, so I gave him more water till he spoke in a soft rasp. "Our camp was attacked by a wyvern. Why were you on this road?" I asked. I realized the wyvern must be left over from the summoner, and the Empire had not gotten around to removing it with the war escalating. I had seen one flying in the distance when Maveth and I had escaped the city, and there had been 2 wyverns that decimated the building we found near the dungeon entrance. We were looting the ruins. The man managed to say after more water. "The first citizen was leading us." "Which first citizen? And why isn't he off fighting the elves and Barteradians?" I asked, now with more curiosity. "Boris Angela. He hired us to raid the ruins of Caelora before the Emperor could send an expedition." His voice was sounding better, and the orc's lesser healing potion had stabilized him. I doubted Duchess Veronica had sent her brother here. More likely he was here of his own accord, trying to plunder the ruins without anyone knowing. "How are you dealing with the specters?" I pressed the dying man. Maybe they had brought the kettle of souls with them. He said most of the specters were banished, but we had a necromancer with us, and he had a soul prison. We made slow progress. "There were not many specters near the western gate," the man stated, clearly exhausted from talking. "Is my boy dead?" he asked while I thought. I looked at the younger man. "Yes, I am sorry. I didn't want to have to deal with a wyvern or 2 again. Is the first citizen alive? Was Justin Cicero with him? Were there any other first citizens?" The man appeared to be giving up his weak hold on life after I told him his son was dead. He didn't answer me, so I shook him a little and repeated my question. He answered weakly, "No, Mo. Only Boris, but Count Cato sponsored the expedition. There were 11 of us when the wyvern attacked. Not sure if any others made it." The man was straining to look at his son, and I helped him. I looked at his wounds. I could give him 4 or 5 of the orc healing potions to possibly save him, but then he would return and tell someone else about seeing me. He hadn't seen Maveth, at least. Still, the risk was too great. "I have oblivion pills," I said softly to the man. "Do you want them? Do you want us to bury you with your son? Or burn your bodies?" His mind was not working well, but he slowly nodded and mouthed, "Burn." I gave him 4 oblivion pills and let him drift off and pass away. I didn't feel right taking his essence after helping him die when I could have saved him. I worked with Maveth to make a funeral pyre. We waited till night to start the fire so the smoke wouldn't draw the wyvern. Once lit, we moved away quickly to where we had prepared our accommodations for the evening. I sent the man's runic blade to my dimensional space. but it was unremarkable and poorly forged compared to others of its kind. It was still worth good gold, and he no longer needed it. Our accommodation was a shallow cave on a hill a good mile from the pyre. It smelled of urine and had small animal bones, so we must have displaced a modest predator. I told Maveth everything the man had told me. "Are we going to search for the first citizen?" he asked as he ate some jerky with a sour face. I could tell he was upset that the ring of sustenance was working, and that he no longer felt hungry. "No, we are not going to search for him. If we do come across him, we have to kill him. I prefer to avoid the wyverns' hunting grounds completely. We will move off the road and travel parallel to the river under the trees and pick up the old road north of here," I explained. "If we came across First Citizen Boris, I would kill him. I couldn't risk him recognizing me, and to tell the truth, I welcomed his death at my hand." Traveling the path along the river the next day made for much slower moving than if we had remained on the ancient trade road. Still, I didn't want to risk being spotted by the wyvern. Maveth didn't complain about our route. At least the wyvern would have kept lesser predators from violating its hunting grounds. The only threat my earth pulse returned was a cluster of giant trapdoor spiders. They were not even that large, just the size of large house cats. After a few hours, Maveth relaxed and started cleaning the coins we found by the wagons. We were both moving fairly silently. My earth pulse was very effective, and Maveth needed something to occupy his time. "Most of these coins are from the endless dark," Maveth said softly, keeping his voice as low as possible. "What? Are they goblin coins then?" I asked, half interested. My knowledge of the endless dark was limited. My current focus was on scanning the banks of the river with earth pulses. A few are goblin coins, but most of them have dark elf scripts and images. Maveth handed me one of the silver coins. He had cleaned most of the dirt off it. He was right. It was elvish. One side had a date stamped on it, as well as the words Ishena Isari, which translated to City of Pure Blue Stone. On the other side was the face of a female elf. Time had flattened the relief, and I was not familiar with the elven calendar. "How do you know they are dark elves? The elven language is the same as the surface elves," I asked, handing him the coin back. Maveth took the coin and rubbed it a little more with a cloth before answering. "The elf matriarch pictured on the coin is Novania Dralahido. She rules a dark elf city on the other continent in the endless dark, Ishena Izari. When I left my home, I picked up a lot of threads of knowledge. One of the human cities I passed through traded with the dark elves, who only trade in their coin because the humans mix impurities into theirs." He held up the coin. "I recognize this coin." Maveth hadn't seen the coins we got in the wagon lockbox. Most of the coins in the Tellian Empire were either Tellian coins or blank dungeon coins found in reward chests. There was some consistency with other empires in coin denominations, but the Tellian Imperial Reserve collected foreign coins and reminted them with Tellian images. I only knew this because merchants preferred dungeon coins due to their high purity over Tellian minted coins, similar to what Maveth had indicated with the Dark Elves' preference for their own coins. "Are the Dark Elves evil?" I asked Maveth, continuing the conversation as a distraction. Maveth let out a long exhale which told me he was thinking about how to answer. "I know very little of them, and have only seen a few in my travels. Actually, the Dark Elves are not dark. Their skin is mostly pale to alabaster in hue. They are called Dark Elves because they live in the endless dark. Their hair is as white as their skin, but the ones I have seen dye their hair various colors as a status symbol. Their warriors always dye their hair black." He paused as he reached for old knowledge. "They are not friendly to the elves on the surface, but I do not know the reason. Maybe Raelia would know." Perhaps Maveth said the last part as a hint that he wanted to see her again. "We are not going to visit Raelia. If I can avoid it, I will never enter Barteradian lands. We have to be 30 miles north of Caelora by now." "Let's move back to the trade road," I said as I started angling us back. Orienting was not easy without landmarks, and the Agantarawa River was my only reference. The trade road ran parallel to the river all the way to Telha. As we stepped onto the ancient road, I immediately frowned as I kneeled and studied the road. Constantine had mentioned one evening that the stone pavers were spelled so no vegetation would grow on them. Still, the canopy had encroached above, and the road was heavily shaded and covered, in most places, in soft soil, likely from decades of composting leaves. Maveth was kneeling with me. "Most tracks are headed south," he voiced what I had already seen written in the soft layer of dirt. "These wagon, horse, and human prints must be from the first citizens' expedition." I nodded in agreement. My eyes studied the tracks that were not heading south. 3 sets of prints, probably all men. One man was dragging his right leg. Maveth was patient while I studied and walked the tracks heading north toward the capital. They abandoned everything. They do not appear encumbered. 2 of the men are injured. One has a serious leg injury and the other has an upper body injury. Maveth cocked his eyebrow in question. I pointed. "This set of prints shows the man dragging his right leg, and this set has uneven steps favoring the right side." I demonstrated how I pictured the men walking based on how the tracks spoke to me. "You have gotten more skilled at reading tracks than I," Maveth said in appreciation. I nodded absently at his praise. In the hounds, I had learned to track people so I could hunt them. "The tracks are probably just over a day old. We are going to catch them before they reach the capital," I said, digesting the idea that I might have to kill the men. Maveth remained quiet, waiting for me to make a decision on the fate of the men on the road. I removed the blood compass and channeled either into it. Castile's sample was still pulling southeast toward Carenhagen. I had more samples for Castile that I could use, but I hated resetting the blood compass to see if Boris was alive. I sat on a log and opened the compass. Maveth stood over me and remained alert while I meticulously cleaned the artifact, heated it, and retrieved a new sample. Maveth hovered, interested in what I was doing but not interrupting me. A half hour later, I closed the compass and channeled my ether into the device. The compass pulled modestly north, and I judged the pull. First Citizen Boris is one of the men ahead of us. Maveth looked appreciatively at the compass, and then up the road. "What do you want to do?" "I am only getting one pull on the compass, and he is less than 30 miles ahead of us according to the strength of the pull. They can't see a Goliath and live." I focused on Maveth to see if he objected to me killing Boris. I had no love for Boris and would probably be doing Duchess Veronica a favor if I killed her brother. Maveth didn't object but had a pertinent question. "What are we going to do when we get the capital then?" Maveth asked. "I do not wish to be sent into your space, Eric," I sighed. "No time would pass for you, but I understand." I explained my loose plan. "We will cross the Agantarao River, and you can wait with Ginger on the northern coast. We will pick you up once I have chartered an Adventurers Guild ship." Maveth looked at Ginger, who cocked her head in question, hearing her name. I could tell Maveth didn't like my plan. But we had few options to get out of Telhian lands without passing warring armies. I looked at the tracks, the sky, and the road behind us, coming to a decision. "Stay back a quarter mile, Maveth. I will walk Ginger forward and confront the men." Maveth's face pinched in displeasure at being left behind. I can handle myself, Maveth. I have an ether shield amulet and my bag of tricks," I assured him. I showed him the ether shield amulet to prove my point and started walking ahead. Maveth waited unhappily and Ginger looked back at him as we opened up the distance, confused. I handed Ginger an apple to soothe her. "Don't worry, Maveth will catch up, girl." I moved at a fast walk, checking the tracks every hour. It appeared the men were resting frequently. As night approached, I halted and waited for Maveth to catch up. Ginger was excited to have our pack back together, nudging Maveth like she was scolding him for being slow. "They are not far ahead, Maveth. The last urine stain on the tree was still wet and pungent. I just wanted to let you know." Maveth nodded, and I walked away again with a confused Ginger. 2 miles later, in the deep twilight, my Earthspeak pulse found the 3 men 30 feet off the road. I walked slowly and waited for them to reveal themselves. Boris's crass voice cut the air. "We have bows trained on you, traveler. Leave your horse and head back the way you came." Although my pulse gave me a fuzzy image of them, I knew none of them had bows. I was chewing on some tough jerky as I spoke. "Bandits? On this road?" I asked, amused. I had deepened my voice, and he had not recognized me. "I am not a bandit," Boris barked, raspy with pain. "I am First Citizen Boris Angela, and I am commandeering your mount." I stood and waited for the 3 men to make their way onto the road. One man had his leg splinted, and had an empty scabbard on his Hyphus sword was another lesser runic weapon in the moonlight. Boris held his dungeon-forged weapon, but had his ribs wrapped. The third man looked uninjured but frail, definitely not a warrior. No weapons and no shoulder musculatura. In my deep voice, I sought information. Duchess Veronica did say her brother was stealing from the Emperor. She asked me to go keep an eye on him and report. The three men looked at each other, a bit confused, and Boris spoke for them. "How did my sister find out about my expedition?" Boris said, vitriolic. This was interesting information, and I was glad I had taken the time to talk. "She has her own spies in Count Cato's household," I said dismissively. I balled up the chewed jerky in my mouth and spit out the salty glob on the ground. I could sense it was getting close to the time to dance. Boris sounded a little desperate. 100 gold for your horse and your silence." Boris stepped closer, and the uninjured man started to form a spell form in his hands, indicating their intentions. Magebane appeared in my hands, and I released Ginger's reins. Boris was a good swordsman, but he must have broken his ribs, as I easily deflected his blade and slashed above his knee, cutting deeply into his quad. Even his hardened skin couldn't stop the Magebane. The mage's spell splashed across my etheric shield as the amulet worked. The blue flash of the shield lit up the surroundings briefly and highlighted my face. My disguise included a deep reddish brown rubbed into my hair and beard, and my face had some dark shadows that made me look older. Still, recognition flashed on Boris' face. "You!" He stumbled back, as if he had seen a ghost. "Kill him!" The mage was confused by the aether shield, and their third companion could barely stand. Boris' stone skin spell form was already dissipating from the ether poison of the blade. I didn't hesitate to move past Boris to reach the mage. I slashed his arm as he tried ineptly to block it. I then turned on the third man who was limping backward. I moved into him, blocking a feeble strike with an air shield, and then delivering a lightning stab to his throat. I turned to face the crippled Boris and incapacitated mage while pulling out a glowstone. That should alert Maveth to come forward. "What did you do to me?" Boris rasped angrily as he struggled both to use his aether and remain standing. I ignored his plea and asked the mage, "Are you the necromancer?" He nodded fearfully. "Tell me, what is a soul prison?" I asked calmly. Under the light of the glowstone, the mage cringed away from me. Boris had dropped to one knee, supporting his body with the runic sword. "Don't tell him anything," he spat angrily at the mage. I looked down the road and could see the large, shadowy shape of Maveth coming. I raised my sword and addressed Boris. "I didn't ask you, Boris. Your friend betrayed you." "I know your secrets," Boris said obnoxiously. "My only true friend is about to join me," I said without looking away, thinking it was a trick. "Brutus," Boris searched for his last name. "Brutus Salacia. He told me all your secrets. I really was not up for a villain's monologue." "And where is Brutus? Did you kill him?" I said impatiently. "He slowed the wyvern for our escape. He is dead, but he told me." I raised my sword, not caring what Brutus had told him. I was already dead to the Empire. Boris made to defend himself from his knees, but I batted aside the runic blade easily and came back with a rapid slash across his throat. Boris was stunned at my act, and his eyes widened in disbelief at what I had just done. Did he think his status as a first citizen, or whatever secret Brutus had told him, would shield him? My anger from all my interactions with the first citizen and his minions had boiled over. Boris wasn't going to be walking away tonight. I watched as his hand went to his throat to try to stem the bleeding. The terror in his dark eyes from knowing he was going to die didn't affect me. "For Brutus, then," I whispered. In my mind, I had avenged another legionnaire's death due to a first citizen's greed. Boris slowly fell forward, collapsing before Maveth reached us. I watched him bleed out and die, then turned to the dumbfounded mage. Under the glowstone's luminescence, I probably looked like a callous murderer. I licked my lips slowly to find my voice. "What is a soul prison?" The mage fumbled in his pockets and produced a large crystal. "A necromancy vessel," he stuttered out. "Weak necromancers require a soul to animate the dead. I walked forward and took the offered crystal. It was twice as thick as my finger, and the rich, purple color reminded me of an amethyst. "This helped you clear the ruins?" I asked the terrified necromancer. "Yes," he squeaked out, cowering in fear as Maveth arrived and took in the scene. Maveth didn't look shocked or disappointed, which helped me accept my act. I think the fact that I didn't feel any remorse was what unsettled me. Killing was feeling too normal for me. I turned back to the necromancer. "What were you trying to get from the ruins?" Even though he hadn't moved, he was out of breath. "The library. We were trying to reach the library. The ancient tomes are worth hundreds of gold each," he stated, his eyes fixed on Maveth. I had to agree that the shadows of the glowstone made the large Goliath look more menacing, especially with his impassive visage. "Did you succeed?" I asked, then snapped my fingers to get his attention when he didn't answer. "No, we were only camped for 5 days before the wyvern came at dusk. Brutus told us there might be a wyvern in the area." Boris didn't believe him, he said spitefully, and eyed the dead Boris. I looked at him doubtfully. 5 days? The snow is gone, and the library is only 400 yards from the western gate. He nodded emphatically. "The soul crystal can only hold one soul. After each specter was captured, I had to empty it. It takes time to use a soul to power a simple ritual." My mind raced back to what he said earlier about the soul crystal. "Wait, were you creating an army of undead?" He put up his hand in capitulation and panic. "No, I didn't break the Empire's laws. I burned the soul with lesser necromancy spells to empty the crystal." He was breathing heavily in worry and sweating visibly. I wasn't familiar with the necromancy laws, but I assumed raising the dead was probably frowned upon. There were special mage companies that hunted necromancers, but the hounds frequently tracked them. Hearn's lectures in hound training had never focused on the undead, as we had been in abbreviated training. "You were not trying to enter the dungeon?" I asked after a long pause to think. The necromancer seemed to be relaxing, thinking I might let him live because of my calm tone and rational questions. "Count Cato wanted us to find the path to the dungeon entrance, but we had no plans to enter. We were just supposed to load the wagons with the elven books and return for this expedition. We didn't realize there were still so many specters left in the city." Brutus said his mage company cleared most of the specters around the library and western gate. He said it would be easy. His tone was a bit angry now. "How many specters did you kill with this?" I held up the soul prison. I could see his mind racing. He must have thought I wanted an accurate count. More than 40, less than 50. I couldn't help but laugh, and it might have sounded a little maniacal as he cringed. "Less than 50 in 5 days?" I said, a little mocking. "Castile could do that many with the Kettle of Souls in an hour. In my last days using the Kettle of Souls, I could have done about 100 in a day. It wouldn't have been a pleasant experience, but it was possible for me." The necromancer straightened. "Draining a soul is taxing work. The Count wasn't able to obtain the artifact that the mage company used. It was moved to the Imperial Archives until an expedition could be assembled. But then the Emperor left to fight the invaders." He trailed off, thinking he had defended himself sufficiently. Mavith's deep voice from behind me asked, "What are we going to do with him?" The necromancer looked just as interested in my answer as Mavith. "How does this work?" I held the slightly chilly purple crystal in my hand. The necromancer took my question as a lifeline. "When the undead is killed, you place it where the creature dissipated. It pulls in the soul after a minute or so. Would it work on him?" I asked, indicating Boris. He got a little nervous. Yes, but it would take much longer, maybe an hour, as he was living, not dead. The crystal would be fighting his corporeal body for the soul. There are stronger soul prisons that work quicker, but this one is not very strong, and really only good for the undead." From the tension and uncertainty in his voice, I thought using this device on people, even recently dead people, was also against Telhian law. I nodded in thanks, as he had been very helpful in answering my questions. I took a slow, deep breath. "I can't let you live. Do you want to take some oblivion pills before I remove your head?" The color drained from the necromancer's face, and he turned and ran. I would have run in his shoes too. "Do you want me?" Maveth's voice asked softly behind me. "No, it is my burden." I pulled a bow from my space, fixed a paralytic arrow to the string, drew and released. Even though night had fallen, the necromancer ran straight down the old road. He only got 30 yards before my arrow pierced his back. He let out a scream and stumbled for 10 yards before falling to the ground and floundering like a fish out of water. I walked up to him. He wasn't even aware of my approach. The arrow had missed his heart by a few inches, but his lungs were rapidly filling with blood, judging by how much blood he was spewing. Magebane came down on his neck to end his suffering. My conscience felt a little heavier, but I was starting to become numb to the killing. I dragged the body back to Mavaeth, who hadn't moved for the entire time, but held Ginger's reins. "Can you hold this while I search the bodies?" Mavaeth took the glowstone as I searched. The most valuable item by far was Boris' dungeon-forged blade. The pommel had an intricate pattern carved into it, and was probably easily recognizable in the Empire. I sent the blade to my space with the Magebane. Boris also had a heavy coin pouch, a gold signet ring, and some papers signed by Count Cato. A wax stamp was attached too. The papers were for passage on the Count's business, and the bearer was not to be detained. The letter was likely how Boris and his group avoided the press gangs. The necromancer didn't have anything useful on him, and the guard just had the lesser runic weapon. I searched the bushes where they had bedded down and frowned. There was nothing but 2 heavy cloaks. They must have fled the wyvern and left everything behind. I returned to the road and took out the collector, not making eye contact with Mavaeth as I worked. The necromancer produced a milky gray minor essence. Affinity essences were usually multicolored, so I did not think this was the necromancy affinity. It took me some time to recall the attribute the essence fortified either shaping. I didn't hesitate and consumed it. I might be able to successfully write out spell forms with a few dozen more of these shaping essences. Boris' body yielded a minor constitution essence, which I offered to Mavaeth. He only considered for a breath before accepting it. The guard produced a minor strength essence, which I also offered to Mavaeth. He briefly argued that I had done all the killing, but for some reason, these last 2 days had made me nauseous. I knew I had crossed a point past which I had no remorse for killing people. "We will stack the bodies and burn them," I told Mavaeth, and he worked with me. I had some alchemy accelerants, and we left the bodies burning behind us. I pulsed earth speak as we walked in silence, well, not complete silence, as Ginger's hooves thudded softly on the earth, and occasionally clicked on an ancient paver. "We should move off the road," Mavaeth intoned after we had gained some distance from the burning bodies. The night was not overly dark, and Neptune's tear gave us decent light, but I agreed. I used a few pulses of earth speak to find an old structure just off the road, not quite claimed by nature. Only 2 crumbling stone walls remained, but they gave us some shelter and were modestly defensible. With Ginger along, we didn't have a lot of options. We spent some time clearing the debris and setting trip alarms before settling in. I needed some sleep, even with the ring. I made sure the Ether Shield amulet was charged before letting Mavaeth stand watch while he had an early breakfast. I found I couldn't use the Dreamscape amulet with the Ether Shield amulet on. They were like opposing ether magnets. When I tried to activate the Dreamscape amulet, it tried to jump from my grip. Grumbling, I stored the Dreamscape amulet and just tried to get a few hours of rest. The nightmares came quickly, but I did not shy away from them tonight. They started with the hounds chasing me because I had killed a first citizen. I quickly turned from prey to hunter and eliminated the hounds one by one. The last man I killed gave me pause because it was Constantine. I was woken by a soft bell being tripped on one of the alarms. My eyes were open and I was instantly on alert. "Mavaeth?" I asked the darkness as my eyes adjusted. "I sent out an earth pulse. A short distance away," Mavaeth replied. "I don't know what is out there." When the image came back, I swore, causing Mavaeth to look back at me. I changed my focus and sent out more pulses. Gnolls. A lot of gnolls. A large pack had surrounded our campsite. Mavaeth had his bow out as shadowy shapes moved through the trees. I tried to count, but not all the gnolls were within range of my earth-speak pulses. They were not just passing by. They were clearly preparing to attack. Mavaeth had his bow drawn, and Ginger was getting anxious. "At least 13. Mavaeth," I hissed. "They all have spears." The gnolls were not too skilled at remaining silent. Branches snapped in the night, and their soft cackling speech drifted on the air as they prepared. We were in the corner of two ancient walls, with thick trunks covering a third side. I pulled some pellets out of my belt pouch while tracking the gnolls. Mavaith, I have some blindness and sneezing pellets. It should slow them and make them vulnerable. I imagined Mavith nodding in the dark as his back was to me. My last pulse showed the first gnolls rushing our position. "They come!" I hissed. The gnolls' cackling language erupted from all around us. In hound training, Hearn had told us this was an intimidation tactic by gnolls when they hunted. We didn't have to wait long as a trio of large gnolls rushed the only wide opening. With just 3 enemies, I considered holding the pellets. Mavith's bow twanged, and one of the gnoll shadows jerked from the impact of his heavy arrow and spun to the ground, accompanied by a piercing yip. I knew gnolls had excellent night sight. We were at a disadvantage in the low light of the blue moon and severely outnumbered. I sent one last earth pulse, and then I slammed 2 sneezing and blindness pellets on the stones near the entrance. There was no wind tonight, so we shouldn't have to deal with the spores blowing back on us. The pellets shattered on the ground, and the air ignited their payload with a pop. A 10-foot-wide cloud burst in the moonlight. Since those 4 pellets had no smoke variants, we could still make out the gnoll shadows as they rushed us with their spears. 7 heartbeats before the spores become inert. I warned Mavith about entering the cloud. 5 are about to scale the wall to our left. Can you handle the 2 remaining in front? Easily, Mavith rumbled as he released a second arrow into a confused gnoll coming through the cloud. He tossed aside his bow to pull his hammer from its belt loop. The black spear appeared in my hands, extending my reach to strike the climbing gnolls. With a quick flick of the spear, the head of the first gnoll was separated from its body. Unexpectedly, the weight of the 5 gnolls scaling the wall affected its stability. The old stone base popped, and the 10-foot wall started falling slowly toward us. "Mavith, move right." Mavith looked over and understood my urgency. I slapped Ginger's flank. "Run!" She understood the command and bolted past Mavith, trampling the last blinded gnoll as she exited the structure, rushing into the night. It wasn't ideal, but it would have taken too long to coax Ginger to move out of the corner in the confusion. The ground shook as the stones making up the wall broke apart like shattered glass. The gnolls who rode the wall to the ground were stunned, and some appeared injured as they yipped in dismay. I took the opportunity to use the black spear to stab 2 of them in vital locations, the heart and head. Mavith's hammer cracked a third's head, and I heard him cursing the loss of his bow under the collapsed wall. The gnolls were not done with us. We didn't see the thrown spears in the moon's low light. One spear pierced Mavith's abdomen, and he grunted in displeasure. My aether shield flashed, draining its charge as a spear targeting me was deflected. The flash of light from the shield blinded us for a moment. I pulsed Earth speak and detected 5 more gnolls rushing us. "Handle the last one in here," I ordered Mavith, who was carefully pulling the spear out of his torso. If we stayed in the structure, they would be free to attack us from range with spears. As I rushed the oncoming gnolls, I was worried for Ginger, but first, we needed to eliminate the gnolls. As I ran into the open, the temperature of the air suddenly dropped unnaturally. Gnoll mages were rarer than an ogre that didn't reek. It appeared Fortuna was taking the night off from watching over me. Frost appeared on the ground as I ran, but more deadly was the unnatural fog materializing around me and filling the woods, rising to the canopy. The gnoll shaman mage, whatever you called it, it was smart. The fog was thick and rising, and soon the woods would descend into complete darkness, giving the advantage to the gnoll's dark vision. Gnolls hunted at night, but usually in packs no larger than 6. If I ever had a chance to talk with Hearn again, I was going to bitch about this encounter, as it was far from what he taught us. Just before I clashed with the lead gnoll, I sent out an earth pulse and cursed. The flash image returned more than 10 gnolls in range, some of which were half the size of the warriors. Focusing on my opponent, my air shield deflected a spear, and my spear tore out his guts. I pivoted and swung the black spear in an arc, slashing 2 more gnolls, one critically, just below the neck. The remaining 2 uninjured gnolls backed off and defended instead of attacking. I couldn't waste time as the darkness was rapidly encroaching. I cut one of their spears in half in a quick exchange, the black spear easily cutting the shaft. These gnolls were strong but very unskilled with their weapons. The most experienced hunters in the pack would have attacked first, but they were now all dead. I pressed forward, as I doubted it would be long before I was in complete darkness. I started to form an idea of what these gnolls were doing. These gnolls must be migrating their entire pack, maybe away from the war front. The distant gnolls were smaller, so likely younger, and running away from the combat, and their high numbers matched my conjecture. Before I could engage the remaining gnolls, an unseen arrow pierced my thigh, and I struggled to remain standing. I grasped the arrow, and it snapped in my grasp and crumbled. I concluded it was an ice shard, and not an arrow from the gnoll's spellcaster nearby. I was hobbled and soon fending off the 4 resurgent gnolls as they got confident from my injury. I wanted to pulse Earth Speak and search for the caster, but couldn't find the time to divert my attention from the fight as they attempted to surround me. Without my Aether Shield amulet available, one of these ice arrows could strike me in a vital region. As I worked on healing, I shuffled to put my opponents between me and the mage's likely direction. The ice arrow had penetrated deeply, and it must have had a freezing effect tied to it, as the surrounding muscle was damaged as well. I pushed Aether blindly toward the wound. When I was sufficiently healed, I surprised the gnolls, lunging on my bloody, injured leg that I had been favoring. I grunted in mild pain since the wound was not quite healed. The spear pierced the surprised gnoll's sternum. I extracted the tip at an angle, widening the wound and causing a spray of blood. The other young gnolls backed off in fear. They didn't realize my vision was almost gone as darkness quickly descended. I broke away and raced toward the gnoll I suspected was casting spells. If I could eliminate him, I hoped, it would break the gnoll's spirit and lift the darkness. Unfortunately, my guess was correct, and another unseen ice arrow pierced my chest. It had been too dark to see the attack, and I collapsed behind a tree, wheezing as cold blood filled my lungs. It hurt to breathe as I quickly and carefully worked the ice shard out to speed up the healing. As I healed the injury and spat congealed blood, I switched the spear from Magebane to deal with the caster. The thick fog covered the canopy, and the darkness was almost complete. My earth pulse told me the gnolls were retreating, no longer interested in the fight. I released a long breath of relief. If I had to continue the fight, I would have had to use a glowstone and be a marked target with attacks coming from the darkness. I focused my senses on listening to the woods. Maveth was still in the structure, but I didn't hear any sound of Ginger. After a few moments, I heard Maveth's voice cut the night air 50 yards away. "Eric, where are you? Stay there, Maveth. Maveth, I will come to you. The gnolls are retreating. They are a large migrating pack," I yelled back. My chest injury had healed sufficiently for my breathing to return to normal. The metallic taste of blood lingered in my mouth. I kept spitting to clear it. The gnolls were fleeing, already out of the range of my pulses, and my aether core was pretty depleted. I was content with letting them retreat, as the darkness was not receding. As my racing, adrenaline-fueled heart calmed, I spent time recharging the Aether Shield amulet, and then stood for my cover. I moved back toward Maveth, but no attack was forthcoming. In the light of a glowstone, Maveth was leaning against the wall, his abdominal wound mostly healed. "Do you need more of the orc healing potions? My mouth may never recover if I consume another," Maveth whined in good humor. "I have just some lingering soreness, but will be fine." "Where is Ginger?" His tone changed to concern. I listened to the quiet night and didn't hear anything. "I will go look for her with Earth Speak. She probably didn't wander far away," I replied with hope. "I will go with you," Maveth stated, not taking no for an answer. I didn't object, and we moved into the dark woods. I pulsed infrequently to conserve ether and wondered why the dense fog overhead hadn't dissipated with the departure of the gnoll spellcaster and his pack. Maybe it was because there was no wind tonight. We were forced to use a glowstone to light our way. A pained equine cry cut the night a distance away. Maveth was already lumbering ahead to Ginger's rescue. If it was strange to put our lives in danger for a horse, neither of us mentioned it. I paced myself with Maveth, holding the glowstone and Magebane. The horse's second cry had us both shifting into a sprint. My earth pulses increased in frequency as we closed in on the combat. I got some rough feedback on what was happening. One of the gnolls had roped Ginger and secured her to a tree. She was fighting back as they tried to take her down with spears. "They are killing her," I snarled as I began to outpace Maveth. Maveth's war cry echoed in the night behind me, drawing the gnolls' attention away from Ginger. I reached them first and slashed into the nearest gnoll, deflecting his spear with Magebane while tossing the glowstone on the ground to light the area. My second slash was to free Ginger, who was bleeding from multiple stab wounds. Instead of running, she reared and came down on a gnoll, crushing its skull in retribution. I only detected 6 gnolls in the clearing. One was dead and one was wounded. Maveth's hammer crushed a third, and then things went dark. I guessed a gnoll had covered the glowstone, so I produced another, but its light only lasted a few breaths before being snuffed out like a candle. Maveth was blinded as well. "I can't see," he said, his deep voice echoing nearby. I pulsed Earth speak again and saw the 3 young gnolls grouped together. Their cackling language echoed in the woods, and I guessed our loss of sight was due to the gnoll mage somehow. More cackling conversations occurred around us in the deeper woods, and it angered me. Ginger was huffing angrily nearby, bleeding as I tried to call her to me. "Ginger, come, Apple." It didn't work, as she was also blind and heavily injured, but at least her training kept her from running from the battle. A thud sounded, and Maveth grunted. "An arrow has struck me." "Is it an ice shard?" I asked as I continued to pulse Earth speak to fight the fog of war. I was now fairly certain which of the distant gnolls was the caster. "Yes," Maveth's voice returned angrily as I heard ice crunching in his grasp. "I am going to rush the caster. He only has 2 guards," I informed Maveth. Not being able to see in the dark was becoming an annoyance. I was so accustomed to the night vision goggles of the hounds that losing that ability needled me. Perhaps I should have searched the archives for hound gear, or tried to locate more hound caches in the Western Empire. As I raced toward the trio of gnolls, my aether shield flashed as an ice shard shattered on the defensive magic. The flash and confusion allowed me to close the distance, and the gnoll guards interposed themselves to protect their caster. I had overestimated myself. In the dark, I took a spear to the shoulder and one to the chest and had to step back and recover. It was too hard to fight in the dark, even with earth pulses, when my opponents could see and I could not. I could tell their general location and their rough movements, but their bodies were not clear enough to defend myself from their attacks. I retrieved the blindness pellets and cast them into the ground, but I knew they were prepared for the trick from the cackling warning from the mage. I started to retreat, backstepping toward Maveth and Ginger, and produced my 3rd glowstone. It too soon winked out, and I shoved it agitatedly into my pouch since my aether wouldn't charge it. I only had 1 glowstone left in my dimensional space. The 2 gnolls with spears were now getting bolder, stalking me as I retreated. I had stopped the bleeding from the spear wound, but defending against the mage and his guards was too difficult if I couldn't see. My ether was dangerously low from the night's combat as well. Fuck. I swore to myself. I needed to see in the dark, and then I could. I was stunned as my vision suddenly crystallized. My vision was like twilight, heavily gray in color, but high in contrast. I understood what had happened. I had just imprinted a spell form to see in the dark. I was channeling ether into the new spell form on my ether core, and it was affecting my eyes, similar to the hound goggles. My vision was only clear to about 25 feet, but that was good enough to handle the overconfident gnolls. A grin slowly formed on my lips, and the gnolls sensed the change in my demeanor. Before they could back away, I rushed the pair. They didn't stand a chance. Their brains were still processing my change in confidence. Magebane made short work of the pair, and I chased down the mage after his guards fell. The mage tried to flee, necklaces of bone rattling as he stumbled away in fear. I cut him down from behind and realized he looked ancient for a gnoll. I pulsed Earth speak, but no more gnolls were in range. There were still more gnolls out there, but they were mostly females and pups, unlikely to bother us. I returned to Maveth, who was still in the dark but guarding Ginger with the remaining gnolls all dead. "It's over, Maveth. The caster is dead." I produced the last glowstone to shed light on us. Maveth blinked until his vision cleared. My eyes didn't need to adjust to the light until I dropped my new spell form. I hadn't planned to hunt down the remaining gnolls, but after seeing Ginger's wounds in the light, I changed my mind as my anger surged. Ginger was in bad shape, but at least the artificial clouds faded with the death of the Gnoll mage. She was so upset she wouldn't even take an offered apple. While Maveth stood watch, I calmed her and talked to her as I used healing salve to close 9 puncture wounds. Don't worry, Ginger. Revenge is coming. I checked her over one more time, wiping the blood away to make sure I didn't miss anything. The deep punctures would require a healing potion, but I didn't think Ginger would consume the Orc Pathfinder brew, so I gave her one of my few Hound Lesser healing potions. She still didn't like it, foaming more than swallowing, but I think she got most of it down. Maveth, how are you doing? I asked, Ginger finally appearing recovered. I relaxed. At least her appetite was back, as she ate 3 apples noisily from my hand. It is difficult fighting in the dark, he complained in a flat tone. I have some abdominal pain, but I think it is from the orc potions, and not a lingering injury. Maveth released a sharp flatulence, and then another, his digestive system agreeing with his assessment. Yes, that helped relieve some of the cramping. Maveth was completely serious and not making a fart joke, but I laughed anyway. After the night's ordeal, I needed the laugh. I turned inward toward my ether core to try to feel out the change. I channeled ether through the new spell form, and my vision sharpened again. It was a weak spell form, and I guessed it must be my illusion affinity. Night vision had not been in the spell form book I had studied, so it was a mild surprise, but it made sense. The night vision was significantly weaker than the hound goggles, lacking color, but it compensated for a weakness. The spell form also felt more primal than the other intricate spell forms I had learned. The only time I could recall studying night vision spell forms was when I briefly examined the night vision goggles with my earth speak. This was actually the second time I had imprinted a spell form through willpower and need. The first time was when I created a spell form to pull as much out of an essence as possible. I was in Legion training and had just won my first essence from placing in the spear competition. I patted Ginger reassuringly and retrieved the collector. Under the light of my last glowstone, Ginger and Maveth followed me to the Gnoll mage. The other glowstones were darkened and useless. Whatever the Gnoll mage had done to them had destroyed their ability to absorb aether and give off light. The fact that he did that from over 50 feet away was impressive and indicated he had been powerful. Under the glowstone, the Gnoll mage had wrinkled skin and bristly, thin white fur. Henno, it was as she appeared ancient and had loops of bone necklaces hanging around her body. Maveth grunted. A soothsayer. What? I asked as I placed the collector over the strangely citrus-smelling body. A soothsayer. The bone necklaces are for divining the future. A soothsayer would cut the thread, toss the bones, and then read them. I have never heard of a gnoll being a soothsayer before, though. I wonder who trained it. Maveth said, intrigued. Thick etheric smoke was drawn into the collector. A major essence quickly formed, but I thought enough smoke had been drawn to form an apex from my experience. I had never seen a clairvoyance divination essence before. The sphere appeared oily as I turned it, and images in the oil came and went before I could focus on them. I moved to her 2 guards next, and then the rest of the gnolls. The collector formed 2 minor quickness essences, 2 minor dexterity essences, and 1 major strength essence. The strength essence was from the largest gnoll who had led the rushing group. Maveth had put one of his large arrows near its heart, and it bled out from the injury. Do you want the major strength essence, or the 4 minor essences? I asked Maveth as I stood from the last young gnoll who had yielded nothing. The morning sky was graying, and I was eager to track down the rest of the gnolls. Maveth was cleaning his retrieved arrows with leaves. He looked up and considered. The quickness essences are good enough for me. I deposited all 4 minor essences into his hand and consumed the strength essence myself. I didn't even ask if he wanted the soothsayer's essence. It would improve my ability to maximize gains from essences. The gnolls are heading west. I want to try and hunt them down, I stated while rubbing Ginger's neck. Maveth sucked his teeth. Maveth sucked his teeth. Shouldn't we continue? We will lose a day hunting down the gnolls. He indicated the 8 dead gnolls around the structure in which we had camped. We killed their best hunters and their powerful soothsayer. If we were to remain in the Empire, I would agree it is in our best interest to hunt them. But we are leaving, are we not? Maveth stressed the last a little. I could hear the underlying urgency to get to his sister in his voice. I pulled out Ginger's grooming kit to remove the dried blood and sighed. Okay, I agree. We will continue on to the capital. We will cross the river tomorrow and approach on the far shore." Mavith nodded in appreciation that his advice was taken. We moved at a fast pace up the old trade road for the rest of the day as we closed in on Telha. We crossed the river as planned. I put everything I could in storage and Mavith and I swam across in our underclothes, while Ginger made her way across with me, holding her lead line. She was actually pretty excited to swim and danced around on the opposite shore, excitedly shaking the water off. My horse liked swimming and wanted to go back in. We dried off in the spring sun, and then dressed. After last night, I was tempted to don armor for protection. It could have blocked those 2 ice arrows, and not wearing a helm meant I was one lucky blow from being knocked out or killed. The ether shield was a remarkable artifact, but it only worked once before requiring a short cooldown, and needed to be fed either to recharge. As we walked through the woods on the opposite shore, I informed Mavith of my plan. "Mavith, you are going to take Ginger north to the coast. I will charter a ship from the Adventurers Guild and we will pick you up." Mavith didn't like my plan. "I don't think we should separate, Eric. Goliaths are rare. If I am seen with you, it will be easy to figure out that I am alive." I rubbed Ginger's neck. Ginger would also be seized for the war effort. Mavith grunted unhappily but didn't offer an alternate plan. We found more signs of gnolls, goblins, and something that looked like the tracks of a troll to me, but they were weeks old. There were more than a few boot prints as well, belonging to a civilized race. It looked like the rain had been sparse the last week, leaving old tracks intact. When we reached the location of the Gnoll Garden, the tower where the Mage College trained their mages and where the hounds used to train, I scouted ahead alone. The tower was abandoned, with no fresh tracks nearby. Still, being cautious, I led Mavith and Ginger on a wide loop around it. After traveling a few miles north, I stopped us. "Mavith, continue northeast from here." I handed him Corvus Hound medallion from my hand. "If you get in trouble with someone who isn't a hound, tell them you are on hound's business. Don't show that to a hound, as the man it belonged to is now dead." Mavith took the amulet. "I don't like being separated. How long will you be?" I had to consider the question. "Don't wait longer than a week. If I can't get a ship in 2 days, I will join you here. Watch for a ship flying the Adventurers Guild flag near shore. You see that? Then show yourself. This is an artificed spyglass." I handed him my hound spyglass. "Just channel ether into it. Turn these to change the magnification. I will be on the bow." I then asked a difficult question. "Do you want to give a blood sample?" I had explained the blood compass to him but hadn't broached the subject. It would make it easier to find him. "I think that is wise." He tore a scrap of cloth, cut his arm unflinchingly, soaked the cloth, and handed it to me. I nodded at his trust and sent it to my space. Mavith played with the spyglass while I pulled out his pack and prepared supplies for him and Ginger. When we parted, I was optimistic. Even if I couldn't charter a ship for us, I hoped to learn enough in the Adventurers Guild Hall about how we could safely enter the Bhutan Caliphate. I moved through the night, practicing with my new spell form. Seeing everything in grayscale was disappointing, but it was better than not having the ability to see in the dark. I pulsed Earth speak as I moved along the river. I arrived at a fishing village a few miles upriver of the capital. It was dangerous living on this side of the river, but I guessed it was also much cheaper for the people. Most of the houses looked like they were of rough construction, and I guessed that fewer than 100 people lived there. When the sun rose, I walked with a limp into the town. Only a single watchman was on the wooden palisade. It didn't take long to barter for passage across the river for 5 large coppers. The old man and his grandson happily paddled me to the docks of the capital. The old man politely answered my questions during the entire 2-hour trip to the capital. He didn't ask me questions in return, which I appreciated. He didn't know much about the war other than that barges loaded with men and supplies frequently went upriver. He delivered fish every other day to the docks in Telha, and usually made half a silver for the effort. Taking half the day to bring me to the capital for 5 large coppers was a welcome break from casting nets all day. When we reached the dock, I tipped him a dirty small silver and stepped off. The lower dock smelled like a mix of salt water, fish, and unwashed bodies. I was happy to note that a ship flying the Adventurers Guild crest was in the larger docks. It had the same symbol as my guild medallion, a tree with leaf-covered branches and mirroring roots. I just had to hope they were not still locked down and could sail. There was a lot of activity as laborers rushed about the small watercraft. The village I had come from was not the only fishing village that supplied the capital. A city guardsman intercepted me before I took 3 hobbled steps. "Name and business and tell her," he rasped with a dry throat and foul breath. "Lucy and Beatrix, just doing some shopping for the family." My disguise had rough clothes and a worn cloak. My hair and beard had streaks of gray, and I walked with a heavy limp and a slightly hunched back. The guardsman seemed to consider me for a long moment. "The cost to enter the city is a large copper." I didn't actually know if that was true or not. I'd never had to pay as a legionnaire before. Instead of arguing, I angrily dug into my pockets and produced a large, dirty copper. Maveth had cleaned the coins, but it was hard to erase the length of time it had been buried. The guardsman studied the foreign dark elf coin for a long time before pocketing it and walking away. Dozens of different coins passed through the city. Sometimes a vendor would refuse one, but it was not overly suspicious to pay with foreign coins or dungeon coins. The coins would eventually find themselves melted down and stamped into proper Tellian coins. I walked through the city, maintaining my limp and looking longingly at the bathhouses I passed. When I reached the thoroughfare, I gazed right for a long time. That way led to the Mage College, where Rena should be. I was tempted to confirm her health, and perhaps convince her to come with me and desert the Empire. Eventually, I walked to the Adventurers Guild, not risking a visit. Entering, there were a lot fewer people here than the last time. The air smelled of stale beer and sweat. I assumed the diminished population was due to the war. Seated at a table were 5 people playing cards. I recognized Guildmaster Icarus, smiling and playing cards. He looked up at me, interested in my entrance, but didn't move. Desdemona had her back to me, but I recognized her dark, sun-beaten black hair. She was talking animatedly to someone, accusing them of cheating in a friendly tone. I hobbled to the table, drawing everyone's attention. Desdemona craned her neck, but no look of recognition flashed on her face. "Guildmaster Icarus spoiled my disguise. What brings you back to our guild hall, Legionnaire?" Desdemona squinted her eyes a few times before recognition finally flashed on her face. She didn't look happy to see me, so this might be harder than I had planned.